We are live. All right, so we'll just give everyone a few moments to settle in, gather around the campfire, listen to stories. Hey, hi, and hello. I am Lockdust, and today I'm here with world-renowned wargamer and board game enthusiast, Rebecca Banky.
That's me. It's a very, very delightful and honorific title. I appreciate that. I mostly just like dolls, you know.
Professional dolls.
Professional. They're
strong dolls.
They're war dolls, so it's it's a big deal now. That's the line. Gotten through customs a few times with that.
Of course.
Yeah.
Like, they have mini swords though.
yeah. Mini swords, some of the mini guns. It's a big deal. Like, don't say guns when you're going through customs. That's a bad choice.
No.
Swords even. Swords is dicey. Dicey. That was a board gaming joke. Get it because of dice? They're in the games with the no.
Tell me more about these dice. Oh, I won't go down that path. Anyway, so today we are here to discuss Rebecca's journey coming out as a trans woman, as a prominent figure in the gaming industry. And we are going to utilize the most serious and professional tools that we have at our disposal. We're going to not be playing Jenga this evening. So the way it works is each block is numbered, and so are my questions. So we are going to have Rebecca pull miscellaneous blocks out of the Jenga tower, and as we go through, we're going to ask some questions, and things are going to get real, and I don't know, maybe one of us might have an emotion.
Ugh. I guess folks are allowed to do that now, if you insist. At some point, this is going to fall over probably, and I think then we're just going to pick up the pieces. It'll be a little bit like how life works.
Exactly. And as always, I have a backup plan. So I have one of those Fandangle dice. So when we run out of cower, but still have questions.
Serious topic, but on theme. Board games, role-playing games, dice.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I love it.
So, shall we begin our journey together?
It's your show. I'm just here.
All right. Well, you are here to pull the block.
Oh, good. So this is you get to answer a question based on what I pull here?
I like the idea of you are the prioritized
I'm
answerer.
Pulling my own question? Is that what's happening here?
Yeah. And then if it's something that is for both of us, then great. If not, then...
I have pulled a 3.
All right. How do you define the word queer? Yeah. Is it a slur?
That's a fair question. I mean, queer's got a long history. We sort of talk about umbrella terms like the queer community, and I think it's been sort of reclaimed by members of that community in the last, I want to say 10 to 15 years, but the history of that reclamation process is probably longer. At one point, it was a thing you would say to somebody disparagingly. It was something that was thrown around at a playground, a little bit like the way kids, when I was growing up, would say gay, right? But I think in recent years, it's become one of those inviting umbrella terms for members of the LGBTQI plus community. And the reality of that acronym is that it includes a lot of people who have marginalized experiences of gender, sexual orientation, relationships to some of the very, very life-defining things that we sort of we take for granted, that the normative experience is what everyone has, and then when you don't have that, it's a real journey to figure it out for yourself. And queer is a label that gets to, without saying kind of an alphabet soup sentence, invite you to be a part of something in solidarity, even if you're different. People will say oh, it's important for me to say pansexual versus bisexual. That's a distinction that some people draw, and certain labels fit better for other people. And there's criticism around that idea that you're further dividing. I think labels are really important because they help people know who they are and finally sort of see themselves reflected in language, which is really powerful. And I can talk more to that at some point, probably with one of these questions. But seeing yourself in language lets you know who you are. But then by being so somebody that we can use for legal advocacy and social connection and just finding other people like you in the world who can empathize with your experience. So I think queer is a way to kind of broaden that umbrella again. Long-winded answer, but it's it's a deceptively simple question. Yeah.
Deceptive was my plan.
It was good. It's very, very sneaky of you, right? I appreciate it. You get to Jenga now, right? That's the tension?
Yes, I get to Jenga.
It's going to be so embarrassing when they knock it down right now. You're going for a middle one. The same side? Bold choice.
Oh God. I never claimed to be a champion.
I'm not like a champion of everything. It's like one doll game. Anyway, even then, do you remember the number?
Yes, it's a 5.
A 5.
A blue 5. But that only matters to me.
Right.
What does it mean to pass? Can this idea be harmful?
That's for you, right? You're answering this question, or am I answering all the questions?
You are my guest.
Oh dear. All right.
Yeah. If there is any that you're just like, oh well, I want to hear your perspective, I love to talk and I will answer anything. And if I feel, usually the way that I do it, my tradition is I ask you a question, and if there's anything that I want to add that I feel like isn't touched on, then
you reserve the right to answer the question or elaborate on what I'm saying. Fair enough. I'm probably too verbose already.
No such thing.
So passing is a complicated concept in the trans community, and let me just define it for like cis folks out there, or trans folks who maybe just don't know what passing is, which is it's fair. Everyone comes to this with a different level of understanding. Passing is the experience of being someone who's trans or who has a gender experience that isn't your assigned at birth sex matches your experience of gender. So anyone who's trans who gets to go through life without people knowing they're trans visibly has the experience of passing in some way. And that's short for like sort of socially passing or passing in society, being able to sort of be sort of passed over and not subject to the same scrutiny as someone who has a visibly queer or visibly trans gender expression has. Now that's a bit weird because like non-binary folks like Ray can pass as a woman and not be subject to scrutiny. Like you can go into a drugstore and not have someone stare at you weirdly because they just assume something about your gender that is normative, even if it's not even accurate. Mm-hmm. And some trans women that I know will talk about like going out in quote boy mode or like, covering or trying to hide. And that's different from vocabulary like stealth, which is when you're a trans woman who passes all the time virtually undetectable as a woman. And some of that's about just like natural beauty. Some of it's about like years of practice, hormone replacement, an understanding of makeup and cosmetics. Some of it's just like, you've got the right kind of bone structure for that to happen. Like I was compared to looking like my mother well before I started any kind of medical intervention. So I had an easier time getting kind of closer to where I wanted to be. And passing is, it's a privilege. It makes life easier for you sometimes. But it's also, it's maybe overemphasized in the trans community, and especially because so many people don't necessarily even know very many trans people, or certainly don't know that they know trans people. The experience that gets emphasized is like one in film and television where, we are typically dealing with movie stars who are just a different caliber of attractiveness of human being. So passing is seen as like this universal experience. And unless we're dealing with some kind of tour of trauma, there's an expectation that you're not trans enough if you're not passing sufficiently, or sometimes that your experience is less valid because you haven't like succeeded. And I think there's an overemphasis sometimes on the idea that like a trans person has undergone a transformation, whereas the actual experience of being trans is just kind of constantly having your worldview and your lived experience inflected by transformation as something that occurs, from your earliest days of not knowing that you couldn't necessarily even understand what it meant to just have an incongruity with what you're told and what you feel, to the everyday experience of somebody who just like always knows that they are different and were different, and even if you've passed completely, you're still a trans person. So like you don't snap your fingers and become a woman or vice versa. It's it's a process, and it's a lifelong process. Mm-hmm. So someone who doesn't pass at all is just as valid a human being and just as worthy of like love and respect and legal protection and social acceptance as somebody who totally passes and is gorgeous doing it. Mm. And like, it's nice to do, like it feels good, but also like, it's just so, it's a little bit like, it's akin in some ways to ableism. Like the idea that like, your experience doesn't get to match quite as well or fit in quite as well or requires a little bit more accommodation. So in some way it's less worthy. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does.
Yeah. Is there more you wanted to add there? I feel like I've said a bunch about passing that's maybe only passingly related to it.
I think that you I think you did very well with the word making that you did just now.
I guess I have to pull another wobbly wooden block here. Is that the concept?
Yeah, I was gonna talk about non-binary.
Oh yeah, sure, please, by all means.
All right, so
and be folks are real too.
Yeah, I'm very real. So as a non-binary person, I find that there is nothing that I can pass for. There is no, because I don't like the idea of attributing gender to my identity. I just would rather disconnect myself from it. That is what makes me more comfortable. But I'm also aware that I tend to dress a little feminine. And it just makes people assume that I am woman. And most of the time that is the safest route and I go with it. Even though it does affect me, it doesn't ruin my day because I'm at a point where I try to convince myself that it's okay because I get it. And that's not something fair to do to myself. But it also is very difficult because I feel like I'm in a position where my only option to be they'd in public by strangers is to just look as androgynous and confusing as possible.
Right. Everyone is very obsessed with trying to figure out which side of the line you fall onto. And I'm working really, really hard to stay on like this femme side of the line. I'm doing everything I can to visually present in public. And when there's like things about my appearance or biology or sound of voice or things like that put me on the other side of the line, people want to assert one way or another. And that the behavior of assertion is quite aggressive. Meanwhile, your experience is you're trying to be in the line, like this razor's edge of gender expression. And to get that, not only do you have to encounter somebody who understands they, them pronouns and what an NB person is, but you also have to like do a good enough job to it that they don't label you as something else. So that's one of the reasons why like more people having a nuanced understanding of gender can be helpful for people who want to just like be it and be seen in the world. But then also why we need a better cultural lexicon for talking to people about pronouns and behaviors, because we could be more inviting and it would be like it would make people happier and safer and feel good.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. All right. Now I'll let you grab another.
Now I have to grab one of the tumbling travesties.
Tumbling tragedies.
I said travesty, but I like where you're going with it. Is this a 6 or a 9? How do we know?
Oh, that's a 9. I know because I just know my writing.
Okay, cool.
Yeah, I should have. Wait. Whatever. Yeah, it's a 9.
Is it a 6? Is it a 9? Who can tell?
Either way, I like question 9, so we're gonna do it.
All right, it's a good system.
What is gender euphoria?
Oh yeah, cool. So gender euphoria is a kind of like cute tongue-in-cheek contrast with the experience of gender dysphoria. So to understand what gender euphoria is, you have to first understand what gender dysphoria is. Lots of people don't experience this very often, but like if you're a cis person and you've ever been like shopping in the mall and someone says the wrong gender to you, like you're a man buying like something in a hair product and one a clerk comes over and is like, "Did you need a hand with something there, ma'am?" And then you like turn around and feel kind of like weirdly uncomfortable that you've been seen this way that you aren't. That's like a microcosm of the experience of gender dysphoria. So like that little moment, that little bit of a thing might feel mildly irritating to you. A little bit like getting a scrape on the knee feels after you fall off your bike. But then imagine you spent your childhood having repeated knee surgeries and then you fall off your bike and scrape your knee a little bit. Gender dysphoria is a little bit more like that. So you've spent a large portion of your life gradually coming to terms with the fact that you don't match your body and you're not sure if you're allowed to be. Like that's maybe a broken thing about you that can never be fixed. And you sort of struggle with that in a daily way. And then you constantly experience moments where just like something about your body or something about the way that you are doesn't match. Something about the way that you feel seen or you see yourself or you exist in the world doesn't fit with your lived experience. And it can be really stressful and traumatic. Some days it can just make you feel bad about yourself. Gender euphoria is the opposite of that. It's a moment where your kind of authentic gender experience is affirmed, either in a moment where you get to see that accurately reflected in yourself, someone else's reflection of a comment, like, when someone says "man" to me in public, it feels good in a different kind of way. And it's often most pronounced when it's sort of like a kind of first time that happens in that way. It can be really freeing, and it can feel like finally having acknowledged something that was wrong that happened to you when you were very young, that you just had to be told by adults and people in your life was okay or was the way it was going to be. Someone coming along and saying, that's not right. That's not how that should have been. And being able to say, like, oh, wow, that's a weight off my chest I didn't realize was even there. Like, that moment, that's the kind of gender euphoria. And sometimes it's as simple as like a kind of uplifting moment of like, wow, I can shake that off and feel good about myself. And sometimes it's just like, it's a giddiness almost, just like an excitement about like, I could be me and be free. Like going camping and just, kind of being under the stars, there's nothing else there, and just kind of like running around and just like smelling nature in a way that you've managed to ignore for most of your life. That's a little bit what the experience of being a trans person and finally feeling seen and feeling out and feeling alive. I'll speak naturally to the lens that I know, which is that of being a trans woman. But the first time I got to wear a dress and be seen by people who weren't going to mock me or treat it like it was some kind of a Halloween costume for it. The first time I was wearing that, it felt like I got to be just a little bit closer to the version of myself that I wanted to be. And, it was like being able to smell nature when you'd spent so long just ignoring it, keeping it right below the surface. That's what I think gender euphoria is for me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's a great answer. It's
succinct, right?
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
I don't really do succinct, so.
No, I expect nothing but verbose answers from you.
Long-winded. That's, you can say it. It's fine.
Yeah, I want essays.
Like
answer this yes or no question in the form of an
like
essay.
a thesis, constructed paragraphs. That's my jam.
Exactly.
Like the philosophy degree, you can take the philosopher out of the degree, but you can't take the degree out of the philosopher. I don't know, whatever. Anyway, carry on.
Something, smart girl.
You had me at girl.
Woman.
No, I'm literally fine with both at this point. I don't have time for being upset by infantilization. I'm so worried about everything else in my life. Cool. Did you have more you wanted to add, or are you gonna like struggle? I'm very I'm just trying really hard to not be the person who knocks over the tower.
I know. I don't think this is gonna last long. What have I done?
You should have built a tower on a tower. Oh, that's a bold choice.
Yes, it is. I'm a bold person.
Yeah. Fuck.
All right.
Did you catch the question?
Yes, I did.
Question 10?
Question 10.
Or question 01 if you hold it upside down.
Yeah. But no. So, quantity aside, how would you improve trans representation in board games?
Oh, yeah. That's a really good question. And it's a big question in some ways. I think miniature gaming, board gaming, and just kind of like RPGs and fantasy storytelling all have a similar kind of, there's a couple of reasons why representation sometimes suffers. So let me first address some of the reasons, both like potentially malevolent and quite benevolent reasons. And then talk about like ways that representation could be better. Obviously, numerically, it would be nice to see more of oneself depicted in something, but I don't want every second character to be a trans character, right? So I think malevolently, the reasons we see less representation is people are like, it doesn't matter, or we mostly market to our core demographic of cis white men in their late 20s. I mean, that's the kind of like naivete that can exist in the board game industry and can exist in the RPG industry and has existed in the miniatures gaming industry. That is kind of like what we talk about when we say like a bit of a boys club, right? It would be nice if we could just invite more people to that conversation. And one of the ways we do that is by putting them in our art and putting them in our games. And Magic the Gathering, which is a trading card game that I played, had a trans character in the art and in the fiction, very, very gracefully handled a few years ago. That's a game that, has not always had a perfect history of representation, but is working actively to put that forward. And that's because they see that, accessing a larger market share of human beings and having more people engaged is a great way to do that. And it's a card where, for people like me, I was amazed, impressed, and delighted that it existed. For other people, they don't care. It's a thing that was just there and done. It was not sufficiently loud that it disrupted their experience. And most people don't care, and some people passionately need it. And that's just a way to increase sales and increase commitment. I mean, niche hobbies and fandoms like board gaming, role-playing games, miniature games, those kind of communities thrive not on having everyone be committed and interested, but by having, passionate cores of people. And tapping into more passionate resources is the right reason to increase things like representation. So, long-winded answer to a short question, how can we do better at representation? Step one, you should. The other reason sometimes people don't is a lot of authorship in these industries is cis white men who, occupy a portion of the demographic. And it's great to get more people who have a better perspective on these things involved in that process. But step one is I've met thoughtful people, who did not have a trans experience or who were not the people they were trying to see represented, want to increase that representation, but say, I don't want to do it if I'm going to do a bad job about it. And that's a kind of benevolent reason to maybe not want to do it. You don't want to do a bad job and then be thought of as bad. So now you just don't do anything at all. Mm-hmm. And that's worse. And I do say that because it's important to note that it is way more important to have representation, to see that we exist, than it is to have that representation be perfect and thoughtful. Although it would be nice to have both. Mm-hmm. When Looney Tunes tried to censor Speedy Gonzales from original productions, there was an outcry of Latinx people who saw that representation and grew up with that character and loved it, despite it being incredibly racist. No representation is worse, but don't engage in bigotry if possible.
Yeah.
So my answer to that is, first, do write those stories, do include those characters, do feature that art, and do make it about those things. But then do some consultation, have somebody who has perspective on it, reach out to them. Sometimes those people, I don't advocate pick a minority group who is historically underprivileged in terms of economic circumstance and don't pay them for their labor. Please do offer to pay people for their labor. I have had people ask me to consult on those kind of projects, and I'm normally in a position in terms of my own economic privilege to volunteer my time. It's a cause that I believe in, but that is an act of charity, and that act has value, right? Yeah. So pay people for their labor, but just consult some people, get them to just vet your content. Just say hey, this is a way that I was planning to introduce a trans character. Really listen to their advice. If they're that seems kind of like trauma tourism. Why is that character's entire story about their harrowing transition and their lack of social acceptance? And then you might say I thought that's just what trans people were all about. And they might say, aha, they're actually human beings. And you're whoa, life changed. And then you move on and you both have a jovial and delighted existence. But do that. Tell those stories. Tell them well. Listen to people who have good information and advice to do a better job of it, and then put them in the art and in the worlds and in the storytelling. This is a coincidence. I did not set up this table, but Ray has put the Lord of the Rings Journey to Middle-earth game. This is a beautiful example of Fantasy Flight Games doing something in terms of better representation. Now, this doesn't feature trans representation specifically, but the Lord of the Rings is missing queer people and women, just generally speaking, because that's the story. So this game, includes the core characters you all care about, the Aragorns, the Gimlis, the Bilbos, the folks people want to play. But then it also includes new female characters, well-written, grounded in the storytelling, that feel like positive representations of the things they are, doesn't feel like an act of tokenism. And then it also includes queer characters as just vibrant, living parts of the world who just have the same kind of relationships and connections as anyone else. And their queerness is not the only defining element of them, but it is something that gets to be given enough light that someone playing it who has a non-completely normative experience can look at that and say, yeah, I really like that game. I feel seen by it. And then more people will want to buy the game. More people will care deeply about wanting to buy the game.
Yeah.
So the original question you asked me was how can representation be better?
How can we improve it?
How can we improve it? presence. You said other than just quantity. Well, quantity is the number one thing,
Yeah.
but also just be willing to do it, be willing to talk about it, and just have it exist there. A lot of the fiction that exists in things like miniature gaming and RPGs and board gaming is player driven. As players have conversations about the role that trans and non-binary characters might play in your RPG, or talk about the gender representation and the expression of the characters that you might have, and treat it with the same thoughtfulness you might care about the other epic journeys and stories that they have. Think about it. It's a place that you're allowed to play and talk about as long as you treat people with humanity and respect.
Yeah.
So I guess respectfully and some more.
Yep. More and with thought. Once more with feeling.
Yeah, that's pretty good. Maybe more than once even. Yeah. What is it? Did I just go? No,
that was me.
10. Oh,
that was
God.
Yeah. I believe in you.
I don't know what your content filter on here is, but I'm definitely going to swear at this Jenga tower before I swear in the answer to a question.
You may swear. I don't think any children watch the show.
Yeah. You gotta have faith that that continues.
What's your number?
Oh, I thought it was a C, but it's actually a red 2.
A C.
I'm not trying to unreasonably disparage your drawing, but here we are.
Then it's pink, not red.
Yeah. Anyway, what's question 2?
Question 2 is, what does it mean to transition?
Oh yeah, no, I hit on this a little bit more, but as people tune in, I can definitely talk about it. So transition is it's more complicated than just you were a man and are now a woman. My experience of gender and the sort of postmodern way I like to talk about that expression is I've always been a woman. I've just been misconstrued and had a challenging experience of being able to let the world understand that. And that includes not even having the right vocabulary about it. So when trans folk talk about transition, and that's true of people who have a very binary gender experience like mine, although inconveniently so, or raised non-binary gender experience, we usually talk about elements both social, legal, and medical. Medical transition is not necessary for everyone. And for some people, they take pills that block certain sex characteristic reflective hormones, or patches or injections that produce other ones. And those allow you to develop certain secondary sex characteristics like this. And those things, those can make you feel more lived in your body, can make you feel more right in a way that can combat things like gender dysphoria, as we discussed before. But transition is also some other steps that are really important. I mean, it's legal recognition. It's you'd like my bank to use the right name with me. And that requires a lot of paperwork and not insignificant cost. It's medical professionals giving you the right kind of care, which is a very complicated and very challenging field. Because honestly, someone who, uncomplicatedly addresses me by, an assigned at birth sex is going to give me poor medical care because my blood work doesn't show up right if you do that. Mm-hmm. It shows definitely the wrong levels of a whole bunch of things that are very healthy and very normal and have been advised by a doctor to me. However, they will look bad to somebody who's not going in with enough context. So that's the legal framework, the sort of questions you might have about what does that mean and how do you get IDs changed and what does that look like? But the biggest thing is social transition, just the experience of being able to tell people you love and care about and who you might know, friends and family and coworkers, this is me. This is basically who I have always been. This isn't really necessarily news. It's news to you, and it's something that I want to share with you. And this is this is a thing that complicates and inflects the experience of my life. And I think that's the hardest and potentially the most rewarding part of transition, is that experience of just being able to be properly seen by people who come to know you. It's like if you had a beautiful art that you were capable of, like illustration or painting or even some kind of performance. And, you were kind of just like the middle daughter in the family and not necessarily seen as particularly remarkable. And then people you knew and loved stumbled upon a performance you were doing, or were invited to see a gallery presentation you had, and just, were brought to tears by seeing you in this new way and truly coming to understand something that had always been going on inside you, but had never that they've never been given the opportunity to see that way. That's what, for me, transition is about. And that's why I think social transition is the most powerful and most important part.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, so like, sometimes it's I was a man and now I'm not, but that's a naive and oversimplifying version of the conversation.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
Yeah, transition is something that varies from each person, and everyone has their own experience and standards of what make them.
Your mileage may vary. Yes, absolutely.
Yeah,
I'm speaking definitely from my.
Yeah,
loss,
of course,
right?
and I'm speaking as a non-binary person. I'm general in every regard, so I have to answer the general questions.
Yeah, I'll be very specific and very black and white. That is not everyone's experience.
I am 50 Shades of Great.
That joke wasn't.
I'm hilarious.
That's normally true.
Fair.
Yeah.
Carrying on.
I got a tower tumble or.
I have to stop. Okay.
Block building. No, another alternative name for this non-branded version of.
Wibbly wobbly. No.
Guess we're moving to the D20 version. This is like when the board game turns into an RPG because everyone's had their warm up and they're ready to make that. Sorry, folks listening over the mic. That probably sounded terrible.
Yeah.
You got a little dice tray.
Yeah.
Exciting. So, what number did you get before it fell apart?
I got 2 actually, which we've already done. So we have to roll anyway.
We could just go to the next one. What's next up?
All right. So number 1. This is one of our more complicated questions. We're all going to take a deep breath here, and we're going to focus, and we're going to get ready to actually share this information. Okay?
I'm psychologically ready.
All right. Rebecca Banky. What does it mean to be trans?
So I know you're preparing me for that as if it's a simple question.
Oh yeah, obviously. But it's such a.
It's nuanced. It's a little bit like that, like what is philosophy question, right?
Yeah.
And there's a lot of kind of long-winded, great answers I can give you. Trans is short for transgender, and that's the way we talk about it. Trans is an adjective rather than a noun, so you wouldn't describe someone as a trans. You wouldn't combine the word trans with another word to make like kind of a new word, like trans woman, like it's all one thing. You use it to apply to something like you would use the color blue to describe to your car. I'm a trans woman. I have a trans experience. I am transgender, happens to be one word, but that's just because it's the word that it's short for. Trans people are human beings, which is an important qualification to make, despite it being something that normally is obvious, whose gender expression or experience doesn't match their assigned at birth sex. And that can be for a lot of reasons. Sometimes those people have XY chromosomes. Sometimes they have XX chromosomes. Sometimes they have XXX chromosomes. Sometimes they have XXY chromosomes. Science is more complicated than grade 9 biology, and that's kind of maybe an important thing to consider.
Absolutely.
And I feel like I shouldn't need to say that, but I do. And like a lot of people think like that's not how I was taught things were. And like, yeah, you're right. It's not what you were taught was wrong. Mm-hmm. I was taught the wrong stuff about what counts as an acid, and apparently water is an acid now. And like, I don't know chemistry as well as a lot of people do. And you don't know biology as much as a lot of people do. And I've got 3 doctors telling me that my experience is legitimate and should be supported. And I trust their opinions, and I certainly trust the lived experience I've got that's been for quite some time. So being trans, it's you'd say transgender versus cisgender. Cisgender just means basically not trans. And that's context for that. I think that's a sufficient answer. I don't know. Did I miss anything?
No, I will reiterate and simplify it a bit.
Please do.
So to be trans or transgender is to just not identify with the gender you were assigned at birth. That is the simple answer. And as Rebecca said, like the trans experience is different for everyone else. So some non-binary people don't consider themselves trans,
sure,
whereas some do. And again, that is something like you can't forcibly be like, no, you're trans. You can't force that on anyone. So it's always important it's the same when you have people who are saying like they're non-binary lesbians. It doesn't matter what someone, like if you disagree with what someone is defining, unless it's to a point where it is dangerously wrong Like if someone's sharing information that is incorrect and can put them or someone else in trouble, yeah, correct them. But if someone's calling themselves a non-binary lesbian and you don't think that's a thing, I don't think that that's a place to argue, because I think that there's enough
Sure.
negativity and scrutiny.
I will like say, just this is a side note to what you said, like
Yeah.
being trans doesn't necessarily have anything to do with who you're attracted to or who you fall in love with.
Oh yeah, I was just using.
No, absolutely right. It's just like some people might think that like those things are connected, and
Mhm.
it is entirely about gender expression. There are transgender people who are women and love women. I for example, have a wife. There are trans women who love men, and for some people, a part of their journey and experience of transition is determining heteronormativity and heterosexual sex is so normalized in everything that we experience in romantic movies, in the way cards are sold in a grocery store, that I think some people on a journey of gender exploration sometimes use exploring certain types of sexual engagement, especially heterosexual sex, as a way to like affirm their experience of gender or come to understand it. And I think that fact has kind of muddied the waters about people's thought that like being transgender means you're changing who you're sexually attracted to.
Mhm.
And there's even a lot of misinformation out there about the degree to which like hormonal changes can change those things. There's not conclusive evidence that they have very much effect at all. There's pretty conclusive evidence that spending most of your life trapped inside a closet of hate can make it very difficult to know who and what you are.
Yeah.
So a lot of people who transition sometimes ask other useful questions, similarly to the people who say, okay, well, I'm starting a brand new business in a marketplace that's never existed before. How else should I do things uniquely? But fundamentally, being transgender is just a comment about gender and gender expression, not a comment at all about sexual attraction.
Yeah. Awesome. Thank you for that note. And shall we roll on?
Yeah, roll
Yeah,
on. Oh, I guess it's my turn.
Yeah, it's
now?
your turn.
The stakes are so much lower now that I'm not going to accidentally knock something over. I spoke too soon. There's a whole bunch of stuff. It's a 7. What's question number? Lucky number 7.
Alrighty. How is dead naming harmful?
Okay, that's a good question. So dead naming is a microaggression of sorts. This is addressed nicely in the new Netflix Babysitters Club series in episode 3. It's fun. You should watch it if you liked the Babysitters Club growing up, and if you didn't, it's good.
You should still watch it.
It's really solid. But dead naming is basically the act of using someone's assigned at birth name to refer to them, intentionally or unintentionally. It's a thing that happens often that people maybe don't even think about or do really reflexively, and it causes a kind of gender dysphoria, the element that we sort of talked about before, where a trans person might feel like a little bit less seen or a little bit less real in your eyes. A lot of people misinterpret that as, when you dead name someone, they feel less affirmed in their gender. And if their gender was that shaky, then how did they know they were trans? Let me tell you right now, most trans people I know are more firm in their experience of gender, having spent a big portion of their life investigating it, than plenty of cisgender folks I know who haven't really had a need to investigate it because, frankly, it's sort of worked out. There's no shakiness about your experience of gender. There's a shakiness about how your gender is experienced by other people. It's a little bit like walking into a room with a really cool Halloween costume and thinking you look really awesome, and then having someone not know who you are or say the wrong thing or say something particularly insulting about the way that you look. Not that gender is necessarily a costume, but it's something that exists in a space between your experience of it and other people's interaction and experience of it. So it's necessarily something that you're inviting people to experience, and you're hoping that you can communicate effectively how their experience should feel or should be. So when someone dead names you, it's similar to when someone misgenders you. It's an investment in a version of you that you've tried very, very hard to move away from, that it feels like people aren't putting the energy into accepting or understanding. Dead naming is sufficiently harmful in terms of just kind of rattling someone a little bit that I've heard it compared, and I'm not sure I entirely buy this comparison, but I've heard it compared to offering narcotics to someone who's a recovering drug user. It's not that they're going to relapse. It's not that your gender is going to relapse. It's just that it feels shaky and threatening, and that you've worked really, really hard to build a life around a new form of existence. And that dead naming, it tells you that someone else isn't there yet. They haven't proceeded on that journey. And maybe that means they're not making that effort, and maybe it means they need more time. But either way, it's a combination of disappointing and a little hurtful. I love a lot of people who have inadvertently or intentionally dead named me. And I know that this is not intuitive to everyone. In fact, it's very difficult to understand what this feels like. And it's not something that I'm doing, a flawless job of explaining, because it's hard to communicate that. I will say that if this explanation has been sufficient and you've bought in and you understand what I'm trying to say, or at least are willing to accept that it feels harmful in some way, here are some ways you can avoid dead naming, and here are some contexts in which you should avoid dead naming. When you're talking about someone's past, use their current pronouns and use their current name. You can say things like who used a different name at the time, which might be necessary to the story to help some nuance of understanding. But if it's not, just don't. Who at the time was presenting as a blah, blah, blah is maybe sometimes important to say, or is maybe necessary context to fill someone in on what's happening there. But if it's not, just avoid it. Just dodge those things and just talk about them like their history has existed for a long time. A lot of trans people feel robbed of history, robbed of years and years of their lives. Like they lost out on childhoods, or they lost out on significant things. Like chapters of their life are better erased than acknowledged, because it involves just acknowledging a period of time where you weren't seen right. If you can help those people retcon those experiences and buy them back for them by celebrating them as parts of who they are now, you get to give people back their childhoods. And that's pretty important.
Yeah, absolutely. That was a beautiful answer.
Yeah, thanks.
I'm great, I know.
I felt like I dawdled around a little bit there to the point, but dead naming is weird. It's just a weird experience. It's not like anything else that someone who's not trans can really probably identify with. And if it is, tell me what the heck this is like for you. If you've got an experience that's ancillary.
Yeah, we do have the comments are open if anyone wants to. We have a lot of love and support for Rebecca coming in for our comments right now. It's all just, wow, a smart chick, beautifully worded, nicely expressed opinions.
I do like the words.
And you're so good at them. So before we derail too much, I do want to have my own answer.
Yes, please.
So I just recently changed my name. What's it been, 2 months?
Somewhere in that neighborhood, yeah.
Yeah, you would know. My biggest fan.
More like 3 months at this point.
Yeah.
We're in the.
Oh yeah, it was June. Anyway, details. So, I essentially shortened my name to take off the more feminine part of it. So I like Ray. It has all the letters from my original name. Gets the job done, and it's a little inconspicuous. That makes people question if they're not looking directly at me. It's terrific. I like it, and I am way too easy on letting it go when people dead name me. I still, because my new name is a shortened version of my old name, it's like I've almost convinced myself that it's okay to be misgendered, or that it's okay to be dead named, and that it's understandable, or that my old name doesn't count as a dead name, that it's not that serious, that I'm not as it's something that a lot of non-binary people, or just a lot of trans people deal with, where you feel like you're not trans enough. And it's something that I still struggle with. And I've been out as non-binary for almost 3 years, and I still struggle with not feeling like an efficient part of the trans community, because not only do I have just people who aren't as welcoming because I need to just choose, or I've been called, I think it's a holidayer.
Ooh, a trans tourist?
Yeah, trans tourist. That's pretty much it. And it's just I'm not doing this as an experiment. It's not a fun hobby for me.
The cool thing is, it's non-binary for a while. Back in college.
Yeah, it's just I don't like the fact that my parents are really mad at me about this. But we have a long-winded answer from Josh Jordan, so I'm going to pull it up and then read it out loud.
Ooh, yeah.
All right. When you first made the public transition, I accidentally dead named you, and it made me feel so bad I literally threw up. It doesn't feel good on either end if it's inadvertent. But And I shouldn't be doing this. I don't have my glasses on. And I still apologize for it, even at the time you immediately forgave me.
Yeah, so like dead naming isn't like, it's not an awesome experience, right? But I try to handle things with grace. This is a good segue to a tangent. I hope you don't mind.
Oh, please.
The sort of, you were making a point that I was thinking was interesting, and I think this is kind of related. The idea that like trans people try very, very hard to be graceful about our experience of transition, because we know it's foreign to a lot of folk, and there's a lot of pitfalls that are easy to fall into. And very, very thoughtful people I know still make honest, dead naming mistakes, and very, like people who don't have a lot of information about the subject fall into those pitfalls more easily, even if they're trying very hard to be thoughtful. So like I try really, really hard to not respond angrily, because I think there's a bit of a stereotype of sort of like angry trans people. And we're a small portion of the population, like a very small portion. Mm-hmm. And a lot of people have never met a trans person or interacted with them at all. So for me, sometimes I know I'm interacting with somebody like in a public facing part of my job, when I'm like interacting with a customer, or when I'm like talking to someone on the internet, and I might be the first trans person they've ever met, and they might not meet another trans person for like 10 years. Like that's a possibility, right? Mm. And I owe it to that person to leave an impression with the person I'm speaking with, that I can be thoughtful and graceful, and that mistakes happen and they're okay. And here's how to navigate that a little bit better. And I've got a lot of privilege. Like I had a like, you know, gender inconveniences aside that none of us had vocabulary to talk about yet. I had good parents. I had a thoughtful childhood. I had loving relatives and caring people. When I came out, I did not lose my job. I did not lose my relationship. My housing situation was not jeopardized, and I didn't have family members disown me. Like, that is a very rare string of experiences. So I am incredibly lucky in all of those ways. So I get to be somebody who can stand here on the shoulders of other people who've done labor, so I can understand what it is to even talk about my gender experience, and say like, yeah, no, it actually is a little bit different than you think. Whereas for someone else, they might walk into that conversation with fewer spoons, with less available to them in terms of emotional resources to withstand that conversation. And they might, you know, respond angrily or upset. And that perpetuates a kind of experience where people think like, oh, Jesus, the fucking people with their thing about the names and stuff, and again and all the time. And I'm trying so hard. I'm a good person. And I think that's a really natural reflex to have that moment, or to even just be filled with dread, either in those conversations that you're going to screw up at some point, and then what happens. And I think what happens, the best kind of thing that can happen, is to avoid over apologizing. It's a temptation because you feel like you've done a real harm. And I've communicated to you that you've done a real harm. But like, avoid over apologizing, because that can shift the burden back onto a trans person to be like, no, it's totally okay. It's totally okay. It's a nothing thing. Like they want to move past that moment as much as you do, let me tell you. And just, you know, acknowledge it. Do acknowledge it. Don't skip past it. You know, if you're in a conversation and you're like, she, you know, of course I like, you know, that moment you're like, of course I see you as a woman. Like, that's just a thing. I do it with other people. I do it with cis people too. Like, you start doing all those things, and then like, what you want to happen instead is to just be like, and then I'm sorry, I think I said he back there. I meant she, of course. Like that moment, that's what you need. Mm-hmm. You need that level of just tacit acknowledgement. You own it, you move on, you're done. That's the way to handle that situation. That's misgendering, but dead naming is the same thing. Like, I think I used the wrong name for you before. I'm sorry. I know it's Ray in this case, right? Yeah. That's the way to handle that circumstance. And even if it's a long time ago, I would own it. I would say like, hey, you know, when there's a moment, be like, hey, we were having like a good conversation the other day, and I think I slipped into this, and that's not something I want to do. So, you know, thanks for being graceful about it, right? I get people make that mistake. It happens. I'm not keeping a list anywhere. Like, I'm not Arya Starking this situation. But I do, you know, I wish it didn't happen. And when it does, I'm glad we can move away from it together. And for some people, it's a great opportunity to come to a better sense of understanding. And I think that's awesome. Like, who doesn't want to be able to make the world better and easier for other people? And I have a unique lens to be able to do that by being an advocate for the minority I happen to belong to.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So anyway, that's the tangent I wanted to point out. Just, you know, folks can do better. And we are our worst advocates. Like, I'm way more likely to be militant, defensive, and just like upset about someone misgendering, you know, a friend or a person I care about than I am about someone misgendering me.
Mm-hmm.
You know, someone uses the wrong gender for me, like, oh, did I hear them right? Maybe I didn't. I don't really want to correct them. And like with people who I love and I'm very close to, and I know they're actively working really hard to recalibrate their brains, I'll try to be right on top of it. And I'll say, like, you know, I don't correct you that right away because I think you're a bad person. I'm correcting you about that right away because I want you to you know, to help build those habits, and it takes a lot of time. And yeah, I haven't figured out a perfect script for it yet, but I want people I love and care about to know that I love and care about them, and also that, you know, it happens, and I want to help us do it less.
Yeah, absolutely. And I find like I find like the line of, do I want to correct this person or not, is it's hard to cross, like when it's like I'll use an example. If I went out for breakfast with my mom and the server every time she came over, hey ladies, what can we get for you? Here you go, ladies.
Sure. And
hey,
it's
ladies.
reflexive. It's normal.
Yeah. And so it was just like one of those things where we weren't like, I wasn't mad about it. It was just a who. Every time she said it, it just made me uncomfortable every time. And my mom, who does not usually respect my pronouns or my name or me, was actively, like, I guess, mama bearing the situation because she was getting upset, and she was just like should I say something? Like, and it was just this really interesting moment of like, the only times I've heard my mom use my pronouns are when she's correcting other people.
My mom has actually been really good, and she's tried really hard, but she is also like, she's at her absolute best when she is defending me against an action, which I think is very, like, it's a very real instinct, and I think it's kind of beautiful.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, mom's birthday last year, two of her friends who hadn't seen me since I was like really young were just gushing about what a beautiful woman I had grown into, and they were just like they were really drunk, and they were just like leaning on each other, just gushing about what a beautiful woman I am, and I'm just sitting there like a little intoxicated myself, and I was just like, they're being nice. But then my mom just turns around and just, my mom's a very short woman, so, you know, it just made it funnier. Just like this little like dip in the crowd, pretty much. Just like her arms crossed, just turns around. Hey, she's a they.
Oh, almost. That's great. She's a they.
She's a they.
I can tell you're halfway there.
Living on a prayer.
You get to do the low pressure die rolling moment now if you want.
Ooh. Sorry. 5, 15, 19.
19. We're also using like dark, low contrast dice in like shadowed lighting. So, you know, this is clearly the backup plan.
Yeah. All right. So this one segues very well into what we were just talking about.
Oh, good. It's all connected.
Everything is connected.
I haven't heard these questions before, so this is all, I'm on the spot.
Mm-hmm. So, what expectations did you have for others when you came out?
Oh, God. Well, I would say that coming out took a long time for me. And I knew about my gender from a really young age, and I didn't know that there was something you could do about that, or that there was a way to just not feel broken in that way. And then when I was about 17 or 18, I got close to being able to come out properly. I came out to a few people, and then I had some negative experiences coming out, and came out to some people I was very, very close to, who just sort of said like, that will never be okay, and that sort of shut things off for me for a while. And you know, it was after my dad died that I was talking to a therapist about like, and of course I'm a trans woman, and my dad will never get to know that about myself because he's dead now, and that sucks. And she was like, do you want to go back a minute and like maybe talk about that for a second? And you know, things went from there. So I had expectations. I had expectations that I could lose friends that I cared about a lot, that I could have people in my life just simply be unwilling to accept it. But also, you know, does someone I love and care about die for me right now because they don't accept who I am? Or do I wait for them to die, never knowing who I am? Like, who am I to deprive the people I love and care about the opportunity to prove me wrong about that, to change that assumption? So I went in with some pessimism, with some expectations that I'm going to lose people I care about. And those conversations were very difficult, especially at the beginning, especially with the high stakes people who I really cared about. My boss at work, Jay, who's been an amazing part of my social support network, and was one of the early people I came out to, because I knew I had to navigate with him, like, how do I continue to be your manager in this role? Do you want me to still be your manager? Do you still think I'm a trustworthy person to spend time with your kids? Like, those were the kind of questions that have been drilled into me by a world that sort of talks about transness as a kind of wrongness. I was very nervous coming out to his kids. I had expectations that they wouldn't get it, and they would take weird issue with it, or they'd have a whole bunch of things built up. Neither of those things were problems, even remotely. Jay was like, I think it was earlier this year, he said that, my transition has been an absolute asset to me as a skilled manager, that I'm more empathetic, able to understand with people, able to connect, able to network and draw connections in a way that I wasn't able to before, that has been really positive for his business in a way that, he would not have seen as, was an unexpected positive to a situation he definitely wanted to accept and understand, because I was a person he cared about and wanted to care about. So, I mean, it's not all bad. It's absolutely not. I did not expect that it would be, an easier way to do business in the world. I thought, if anything, it would only be a hurdle there. I did not expect that I would find new and compelling connections, relationships, and friendships with people through transness, which, case in point, I certainly have. I did not expect the cis women in my life, who were amazing and supportive, who became like incredible allies and mentors and friends through just being able to see me a different way. Those were expectations I didn't have, and they've been really amazing. I expected all of the bad things. I expected it to be losing a job and a career I love. I expected it to be losing a gaming community and an industry that I was passionate about. I expected it to not be able to travel to the US anymore. I expected it to be huge conflicts in my family that maybe never went away. And I still knew I had to do it. And it was mostly none of those things. And it was a lot of really amazing things. So yeah, I had some expectations.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, it's when I came out, I had like the opposite expectation, and that happened. Or before I came out, before I was even like starting to question my own gender identity, I was seeing a non-binary person, and I brought them home to meet my parents, and everyone was so respectful with the pronouns. Like, they had questions when they weren't around, like what bathroom do they use? Like I'm going to say like the basic cis questions.
Sure.
Just, and like I did my best. Like I was still like very, very learning. So like I definitely answered things that I shouldn't have in, but I was still learning, and but my parents and my brother and everything, like they were very just like, oh, we're just doing our best. This is new. So we're struggling, but we're trying. And they like were fine. So when I came to terms with my non-binariness, I decided like okay, my parents were okay with them, so they already understand it. So they might have to struggle accepting that it's me now, but they got it, so I'm good. And I just went in absolutely like, hey, by the way, I'm non-binary, and I was all confident and cool, and they were just like, that's so inconvenient to us. And I was like,
the stakes are different, I guess.
Yeah, and that was
child.
That's exactly it. It's just like they had to say like we didn't know them before, we knew you, and now I'm just at a point of, okay, well, it's been 3 years, and it takes the brain approximately 22 days to establish a new habit. So time is not on your side anymore. And my pronouns are they, them. Thank you.
Yeah.
I made a run out of patience.
No, that's fair. It is interesting that people who care so much about the person they used to know that they're not willing to figure out in what ways they were wrong about that assessment.
Yeah.
And I feel like with parents, it's harder, because I think parents, they feel like they make you. And that's partly true. Like, your parents do form a lot of the person you end up being. And I guess they feel like they don't know you anymore, which is obviously not true. Like when I came up to my mother-in-law and then eventually my mom, the conversation was very like, I'm not a different person. Like, I'm still the person I am. This is just like a part of my life that you didn't really maybe necessarily totally know about. And I want to share it with you because I still want you to be an important part of my life. Mm-hmm. And that's a hard conversation to have with people who necessarily and understandably have a hard time accepting it.
Yeah.
So, one of the fun features of being trans is having to do extra emotional labor.
Over and over and over again. Like, there was, before I even started like questioning my sexuality, not before I started questioning my sexuality, I came out questioning my sexuality anyway. Before I was consciously questioning my sexuality, I heard something or I read an article that was about how anyone who's in the queer community is just, you spend your life coming out. Like, you think there's the big come out where you tell your parents and then that's it, because that's what we're told in the media. That's our interaction, where you come out, it's a big thing that makes or breaks your life, and then you continue.
Yeah.
But you have to come out every time you meet someone new and the topic comes up, because it's just like there are some situations where, yes, it doesn't matter to that relationship, but then there are other times where, I don't know, it might matter that my boss knows that I'm queer in case we have a party and I bring a partner. Like, it's a small stake, like they can't do anything, but it's just one of those, I would rather not have the conversation on the spot.
Right. After you show up to the party, and they've had a couple of drinks already, and
they're like, I didn't know you were a gay.
That's a generous version of what that script might go like. It could sure look different than that, and it might use a different term. Yeah. So, yeah. So I wanted to say something to that, and my train of thought disappeared for a moment. You were talking about the process of coming out, right? Quick quip.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. The process of coming out and transitioning, like gender, is not binary.
What?
It is a journey. It is a process, and it is not. There's not a moment.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, is it my turn? Am I supposed to roll? Sorry.
That's okay.
Derailing us.
It's okay.
I rolled an 8, which, if we were playing D&D, would be unfortunate. If we were playing War Machine, would be fine.
I believe you.
But I'd be aggressively cheating, maybe using a D20 for it. So, little sidebar to gaming for a minute there. That's most of my life. Yeah. What do we got?
So, why are trans people sexualized?
Ooh, okay. That's a very large question. And I guess, like a lot of these questions, probably the first step is to define some of the terms a little bit. When we talk about trans people, we talk about a lot of things. We're talking about like people who have different gender experiences. And sexualized, we're talking about like, the so described fetishists, the sort of like men who, are, and it is unfortunately primarily men, just because like most of the sexual agency belongs to men, but people who are not interested in necessarily having sex with you because of the person you are, or anything like that, but because of something specific about your anatomy, for example, like that element of it, that they're sort of they're objectifying. It's definitely that they're turning you into nothing more than the sum of your arrangement of particular body parts. And they're doing it in a way that is for the purposes of their sexual gratification with no acknowledgement of humanity or personhood that might exist. Why does it happen specifically to trans people? Well, I think there's a couple of reasons for that. One, as a society, we don't have a great script for engaging with the humanity of trans people. Mm-hmm. Two, trans women who are especially victim to this experience are women who are especially victim to the experience of being objectified. Three, I think trans people are looked down on as like a sort of social lower class experience, or like something somewhat monstrous. And we spend a lot of our lives being seen as something monstrous and having that script be given to us. So can often have complicated relationships to body image and self-esteem and confidence and all those things. So we can find ourselves seeking unhealthy validation in accepting that. Or we can, be in a position where men believe, internalized transphobia or culturally understood transphobia, that script means that their act of desiring you is some kind of a charitability. I think there's also something that to the notion that like there's a kind of taboo-ness There's a social fetishization of certain anatomical features that allows men who are like attracted to, the female body, but who are like stimulated, aroused, or brought to a different place of eroticism wrong or inappropriate, combine those things for a sort of juxtaposition of experience that allows them a heightened level of erotic arousal. That's probably more detail than some people were necessarily thinking of. But that's something that we kind of like, trans women specifically, like my experience, we deal with like I have been approached by folks who are like, I would have sex with you. I'm pansexual, or I'm also attracted to men, or I'm a little bit queer, so it's okay to want that I would want to have sex with you, or like I'm very like deviant in my sexuality, so you're an okay person. Like I've had that level of engagement, and I know that sometimes that's people who are like, I'm also a member of the queer community, so I see us existing in this umbrella place, and there's commonality in our experience. But then sometimes that's a different thing. And it's like, either do you, one, not see me as a woman, which I am, and your attraction to me is pretty heterosexual in a lot of ways, in fact, most ways, and kind of dehumanizing too. Or two, are you trying to like draw attention to the fact that you see my gender experience as either non-passing or non-conforming or wrong in some way that you want to talk about as a socialized experience? I don't think the way that trans women are objectified, dehumanized, and sexualized is that different from the way that lots of women are objectified, dehumanized, and sexualized.
Yeah.
But I think any otherness is often a fetish.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that fetish can be, like a, fun sexual interest. Like I enjoy when someone who I'm romantically involved in wants to engage romantically with me. But I also, I don't want to be treated just as my parts, or just as my anatomy, or as, some kind of sexual object that I should be grateful for this objectification, like that kind of thing,
Yeah.
I don't know, that's maybe a bit long-winded, but if that, that kind of gets at some of those things, there might be like an iceberg of experience there, and I'm sort of giving you just the tip of it. But there's lots going on there.
Mm-hmm.
And there's certain vocabulary, and there's women who find themselves, like trans women are also, like, as a percentage, more likely to end up in sex work than the average woman, because they're more likely to have housing and job insecurity, which means like a lot of women who turn to sex work, they do so because of material circumstances and not like a desire to do it. So there's a lot, and like trans women are very sought after in sex work for a lot of those like sexualization and those experiences. I don't think there's anything about my gender expression that's inherently worth sexualizing, but some folks do, and I don't really like that. It doesn't feel good. It kind of makes me feel a bit uncomfortable or kind of creepy. Mm-hmm. But it's there, it's happening, and I've outlined maybe some of the reasons why it might happen.
Yeah.
Other people might have different opinions. Right.
Yeah, it's one of those questions that have many different answers
from
many different, yeah, exactly, like many different perspectives, and that was yours, and I appreciated it, and I enjoyed all of the words that you made.
Oh, thanks. Like I'm also not a sex worker, so like I don't know that lens, right? Mm-hmm. And I've never done any pornography, and I don't have an OnlyFans or anything like that. So like that's not something that's like front and center of my lived experience. But even with it not being something that's very essential to my experience, and even not being someone who's like, most folks shouldn't be going out and doing lots of dating in this world right now, but like even having it not be central to my experience, it's still something that I do encounter. Like it's still something that comes up because you're right. It is a feature of that experience. Mm-hmm. Yeah. I'm nattering a bit here, but
yeah. Oh, thank you. Yeah, it's, follow-up question. Do you think that the sexualization of trans people also contributes to the demonization?
Do I think the sexualization of trans people also contributes to the demonization? I think the sexualization of trans women contributes to killing trans women. I think it's pretty common for men to find themselves attracted to a trans woman because like trans women are women and men heterosexual men are typically attracted to women. And then even to find themselves experiencing significant sexual gratification and feel like somehow they've been tricked into having sex with a man because of a cultural script that talks about things like trans women as traps, which is a slur, or talks about trans women as like baiting men or something like that. Like as if a homosexual man would want to sleep with a straight man by tricking him. For one thing, that's like deeply unsafe and also probably not very sexually gratifying for the homosexual man. But like that's not a thing that happens, but I think it's very in the script that like I'm going to get tricked into having homosexual sex and I'm going to enjoy it. And then what am I going to do? And I think like men need to excise themselves of that experience. And that turns into a situation where men have sex with trans women and then end up killing them. And like, I'm not saying that happens to every man, but it certainly is a violence that any trans woman who's a sex worker or even a trans woman who wants to have sex with a man is going to potentially risk. That's just a thing that happens in huge statistical numbers. Mm-hmm. And it's a feature of the way the world is. So, you know, I have to assume that those scary, dangerous men who want to sleep with me and then kill me exist in the world. And it makes me look at people a little bit differently. And that's sad. Like, that's not fun. I don't want to think that way about the people in the world. Mm-hmm. I didn't have to before, you know? Like,
yeah.
Yeah. So I guess, yes, I think it contributes to demonization. But maybe mostly in that it contributes to a sort of cycle of violence that's more to do with like our demonization of homosexuality than it is to do with transness. Again, I think transness gets tied up pretty tightly in ideas of sexuality, mm-hmm. But it doesn't exist only in that space.
Yeah.
Yeah. Do you want to roll another number?
Yeah.
Or did you want to say? That's a follow-up question to a question I was deeply unqualified to answer, so I'm doing my best.
Yeah, it's okay. You're doing good.
Thank you.
I've been enjoying this a lot, so it's
good check-in. I appreciate that.
Yeah, I appreciate your answers. They've been so good. Like, I think that a lot of people may be surprised when you dropped that you didn't have the questions already, because, well, you're just very informative.
I speak well off the cuff.
Yeah, I may have had a moment of, is she peeking?
I mean, I'm looking like as you roll the number, but only because I want to see if we've done this one already or not.
Yeah.
Have we?
Yeah, I'm going up.
Okay.
How have you experienced and handled dysphoric moments while gaming?
Okay, good question. So this does happen. You know, I attended a convention as an out person, and I also attended conventions like as a pre-transition human being who also still was a woman and still had dysphoria. So like this happens, and it happened to me before, and it happened to me afterward, and I definitely hid behind a lot of positive inclusivity, feminism, to justify being able to assert my belonging in spaces. Like, you know, someone would say like, hey guys, how's it going? And I'd be like, hey, you know, I know there's not like necessarily any women around right now, but can we just avoid saying, hey guys, why don't we just say folks or y'all or something like that? That's maybe a little more gender inclusive. We want to create a gaming environment that's more inviting to more people, and including women in those conversations is valuable. And like that was a pitch that I made sometimes that sometimes people would listen to and respect, which I really was grateful for. But was for me sometimes a lot about the fact that when someone said, hey guys, I knew I was being categorized in a way that I was at the time presenting, and it wasn't their fault, but it still felt crappy, and it still wasn't me, and it still didn't feel good. Mm-hmm. So I turned my feelings of sadness and emptiness inside into positive political action, because I'm an optimist and I'm nauseatingly positive. But not everyone can do that. So sometimes moments of dysphoria are best handled like moments of anxiety, depression, or panic, or any other emotion that's very similar. You take a moment to ground yourself in your own experience, to recenter. You smell the things around you. You name 5 things you can see. You really like recenter in a meditative way. And then you just kind of try to work through the feeling. Don't push the emotion down. That will turn you to years of being in the closet, which I would not recommend to anyone who wants to live. But do feel it, experience it, and move through it. The like script about fear from Dune is a pretty good beginning of that process. But that works well for dysphoria too. That was like a super nerd answer. I apologize. I will say that like, you know, being in a group of people has an amazing feeling of acceptance and joy for me. And then being in that same group of people when I suddenly get dysphoric, especially about the way that I'm feeling seen in that moment, it can flip that script for me immediately. And I had a really amazing experience at Warfare Weekend, which was a challenging convention I went to last year. Challenging only because it was my first fully out convention. And it was in the US, in St. Louis, which is the South, for those who are keeping notes at home. And my friend Brett Fogel, who's a great human being and somebody I liked beforehand and like more now, I was just chatting with some people, and he just came over and he just said like, "Hey, Rebecca, it's great to see you." He used my name right away, my accurate pronouns, engaged in conversation, and more importantly, didn't treat it as if he was meeting me for the first time or he didn't know me before. He brought up stories from our shared past, talked about them with excitement. He said, "Rebecca has always been big on blah, blah, blah," when it was organic in conversation or came up and was natural, connecting the shared history and the past we had together to my identity and my pronouns made me feel real and normal and alive in that moment. And that was an experience where I'd spent a lot of the convention anxious about how I was being seen and really feeling a lot of dysphoria. So one of the things that I will do when I'm feeling especially dysphoric is I will find someone who I know is a good, capable ally who has the tools and the resources to help me. And I'll just try to kind of be with them a little bit to kind of feel seen in the way I need to be seen a little bit more. And I don't always make a point of it. I don't always say something about it, but I do try to maybe kind of hang on to somebody a little bit while I'm kind of recentering. And some of my best allies and best sort of cis friends in those moments are the kind of people who can just sort of read the room, not necessarily make a huge fuss about it, but really just do a little bit to affirm me in those moments and help me kind of reset. So yeah, the gaming community can be great. And also it can be like, it can be a mixed bag.
Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, like everywhere can be. And like gamers are just people and they skew demographically a certain way, but they're also usually intellectual, intelligent, engaged, and they can learn and they can adapt. And like you tell me a gamer can't learn new pronouns. Gamers learn new metagames every 6 months. Like they are fully capable of learning new things. They are smart and savvy. And anyone in a gaming community who is not willing to adapt to someone's changed gender expression has made a choice, isn't incapable of anything. And that makes the acceptance feel great and feel present, and it makes the lack of acceptance feel conscious and hurtful.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's a scene. Sorry. What was next? Where did we end up?
Yeah. We ended up right where we need to be.
Good. Am I rolling? Is that the next thing? Are we
yeah, you're rolling. And we got a joke. Someone commented a joke. So I'm going to share it because I can.
For it. It's on brand for you as a comedian. You got to share the jokes.
So, Brian Fox, I wouldn't recommend the smell for things around you at a gaming convention.
Okay, so that's a joke and legit. I get what you're trying to say. But having said that, that smell for things is supposed to just like make you feel like alive and grounded in the moment. And you really do know that you're experiencing sensation and you're not being dissociative or getting outside your body or feeling disconnected from life when you are grounded by someone who's not abiding by the shower once every day convention rule.
Yeah.
And gaming conventions aren't that bad. To anyone who's never been to a gaming convention, we joke and we talk like it smells worse than it does.
Yeah. There's always like the con funk where it's honestly Comic Cons are because you have smelly cosplayers.
Cosplayers are the worst. Anyone who's going to costume, I'm just giving you a hard time. But like literally, like if you're going to put layers and layers of leather on, like you're gonna have consequences.
Especially when you wear that costume to several different conventions and you can't wash it
because it's made out of
whatever
felt and magic.
Hot glue.
I the life of me, and I respect everyone who does it.
Yeah.
My turn, your turn. Where are we at?
We'll call it your turn.
All right, that seems made up, but okay.
Yeah, it was mine.
9.
9, 6.
It was upside down. It's actually a 6.
Perfect. Why aren't there more women gamers?
Fair question. Well, I'm doing everything I can. I've literally subtracted one man and added a woman. So I feel like I'm doing my part. Why are there more women gamers?
That took me a second.
I think it's challenging. It was a trans joke for those folks who didn't necessarily get it at home. See, because of the thing with the why aren't there more women gamers? So that's a big question and a fairly loaded one. I think a big part of it is just they don't necessarily see themselves in in the community, and they don't necessarily feel invited and respected. A lot of very capable women I know game and are very good at gaming, and they still don't necessarily want to go to a competitive tournament environment or a big convention because they know that they're going to play against somebody who's like, so do you know the rules? Or, so are you here with your boyfriend? Like, they're going to get some of those things.
Mhm.
And that's not something that you would treat another player the same way, like that way. It's just not very respectful. And I think that kind of gatekeeping makes it harder for people. And I think that reflex comes from even like kind of a nice place where men aren't necessarily used to seeing women gamers, and they think to themselves like, I'm going to do a thoughtful thing by making it easier for them by like helping them with the rules that they're probably struggling with, because I haven't seen a lot of women gaming, so they're probably new. That's not as thoughtful as you think it is, and it comes from a good place but has a bad consequence. Especially gatekeeping, where like women aren't treated with as much respect in the gaming community, can be especially tough. I know some very tigress women who are fantastic advocates and who do really, really well in the gaming community. And I know some of them have some horror stories. We don't treat our women gamers with the respect that they deserve. And I'm not talking about opening doors. I'm talking about not opening doors. Like, if you're across the table from somebody and you're throwing down and you're playing an adversarial doll game, treat them like they're a good opponent. Treat them with respect. Give them the handshake they deserve. Play your best game against them. And whatever happens at the end of that game, like, you should be able to treat them with humanity. And I think we're not perfect at that. And here's the thing, and I can speak to this not necessarily as a woman, but as a trans person. I can have 100 to par experiences in a gaming convention, and those to par experiences can have represented legitimate effort on behalf of the gamers I'm playing with. Some people might have a reflex to treat me differently because I'm trans, and they can consciously and with energy, they can choose to treat me base level respectful. And that will make my experience acceptable. But then when I have one experience where someone is unacceptable in their behavior, it can sour the whole moment, and it can remind me that this isn't the place for me. And that's a really hard takeaway. And when I used to run the Southern Ontario Open, which is like a big gaming convention, one of the sort of the expressions that Matt Clark, who was the sort of co-organizer of it at the time, he and I we'd sit down and we'd say, okay, our goal here is to make sure everyone has a takeaway from this convention that's amazing for them, like a moment that makes their con, right? So, he and I would do a lot of like wandering around the scene and talking to people and just like really connecting with them. And sometimes it was enough to be talking to one of the organizers and like have a really great moment. And sometimes it was somebody who's like, I just scrubbed out of the tournament, I didn't have a good time. We'd be like, hey, did you hear about Iron Arena? Do you want to get in some games? You want to like, I'll introduce you to so-and-so. We'd introduce them to somebody who was like a great, really fun person to play against. So we try to like make their moment. I think when it comes to people who have minority experiences, they're coming to that convention already having done a little bit more climbing a ladder to get there, and a little bit more climbing a ladder to have built in themselves an expectations that this time will be different. This time will be okay. I don't have to worry about as much as I think I do. And you need to meet that expectation. And you also need to find a way to not buy into the things that are maybe very reflexive that can make the environment harder for them to be in. Stop trying to think about it as how do we, how do I treat this woman, and start trying to think about like, how do I treat this opponent respectfully? And then this is a big question, so I'm only going to answer some parts of it. That's a good part to answer, and it's one that speaks well to my lens. I will also say, and I was certainly guilty of this pre-transition, and probably in some ways I'm guilty of it post-transition as well. The ways we have conversations in the gaming industry, a sphere primarily dominated by a particular type of men, don't always invite people who have a different experience there. They don't always give those people space to be and to feel safe. I have definitely heard a lot of people use very, very transphobic and transmisogynistic language, and I've definitely heard people use a lot of really inappropriate language descriptors and humor around things like sexual assault and things like women's bodies and women's experiences. I'm not saying you can't have fun, you can't laugh, and you can't joke around. I love all of those things from my communities. But when you're punching down as hard as you are, you're just not trying. You're not putting enough energy into it. And like, we're creative, brilliant people who are great at the games that we play. Like, you're playing the same list over and over again. You're trying the same matchup, and you're just doing it because it feels easy and it's simple. And if someone told you it didn't win games anymore and wasn't winning tournaments, you'd change it. You'd adapt to it. You'd do a different thing. And what I'm telling you right now is the way that we're talking in these gaming circles don't win tournaments. They don't invite new people. They don't make people feel good. And it's just not worth playing them anymore.
Yeah.
So yeah, there's more there. Like, there's a bunch more there, right? Like, there's ways that we exclude people all the time. And some people are even invested in that exclusion, and some people just don't know how to fix it. But for me, I think there's stuff we can do. There are tangible action items that can invite more women into these spheres.
Yeah.
Because they're like, people love games. They're designed beautifully. And that's not a gendered experience. And it certainly doesn't have to be.
You're right. That was...
Yeah. Anyway, that's the heavy answer. Getting into whole
big questions.
So. All right, fine. Keep asking the big questions. Right, it's your show.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I'm in charge. Yeah. So we have another comment from Josh Jordan. So I will pull it up. We have, an opponent is an opponent. They should be viewed as genderless. As a judge, I've personally had to deal with women being looked down on or mistrusted on rules just because of their gender. Not a good look.
It's not a good look. You're absolutely right, Josh. And you're right. Like, I mean, I'm going to spend a big part of the show talking about how important acknowledging my gender has been to my experience of coming out, and then also talk about how important it is to not acknowledge people's gender. But context is king here. Or queen, as the case may be. I'm not sure what the NB term for context being important is. Probably just important. Yeah, like, don't treat someone lesser. Don't treat someone with less respect because of something that they're presenting to you in terms of a minority or even a majority experience. Don't treat them as a worse version of someone else that you would treat with decency. If there's something like, if you're playing against somebody in a wheelchair, don't be like, an opponent is an opponent, so I'm going to make them sit on the side of the table they can't sit on. Like, figure out a way to flip your board. Like, don't fail to accommodate people. Don't fail to acknowledge something obvious about them, but do, be decent. Be decent.
Yeah, I'll take this moment to share a personal philosophy that I have. It's gotten me through a lot of my life. It helps me a lot. It's don't be a dick. It's a very simple way to go about life. It's when you go to do a thing, you think about the thing, and then you think to yourself, could I be perceived as a dick if I do this? And if the answer is yes, and you still do it, I think you're being a dick.
And like, if someone says like, hey, you're doing a thing and I think it's not okay, the reflex is to say, yes, it is. And that's kind of a dickish reflex. So maybe sometimes like listen to people who are being critical of your behavior and say like, okay, what? And like, sometimes they're wrong. Sometimes they're being hypersensitive, and that's a thing that happens. But a lot of the time it's not going to cost you much to be able to sit back and say like, okay, are you right? Let's engage.
It's so important to consider just what you are saying is upsetting someone and causing a reaction, and it is important to address it. It doesn't, in that moment when someone's upset, it's not as important if you're right or wrong. It's, you have upset someone and you should get to the bottom of it. You should discuss it, figure it out, and you should do better.
Yeah, or at least validate their feelings. That's at least step one, right? I mean, that's conflict resolution 101 stuff.
Definitely. We have a large comment here from Mark McWarhammer Pants. Oh, good. Shows the whole thing. I'm glad. My experiences as a TO for Warhammer 40K, I have only ever seen women attend as a partner with their boyfriend, and they rarely know how to play. This is the only experience any of the 40K tournament goers have with women in the game. I try to get women to play, but they just have no desire to. And they don't even know anything of the gatekeeping at all. They don't have any desire to play. Any thoughts on getting women to even attempt to play?
Sure. So, yeah, you're right that women in the gaming community is a bigger question than the way that I've presented it. Gatekeeping is a way that as gamers we can directly address our behavior to be more inviting to the women who've already stepped up to that conversation. But we talked earlier about representation, and a lot of women that I know and really have a lot of respect for were just so excited about the release of the Sisters of Battle range, the re-release of it, pardon me, because there had been such a long period of time where just like seeing yourself in the game of Warhammer was virtually impossible. Female Space Marines are a thing that a lot of women bandy about as like, there are like 10 flagship factions this whole game is about, and they're all genetically men, and there's no women in that. Like, this is a game for men, by men, about men. And I think it's really, really hard to sell someone on a game for men, by men, about men when they're like, okay, but like what kind of characters are there available if I'm like if I want to play something like as a woman, what's an option for me? And there have been women who've done some really cool reclamatory stuff in that space. They play like Tyranids and like sort of like hive mothers and like brood mothers and like those kind of things. Or they played like some of the slightly more mixed race alien figures. But it's only recently that Games Workshop has done even a marginally good job of not having every single woman who exists in the game be hypersexualized and every single base version of something be a man. That's an adjustment. Like, that's a shift. And it's a very recent shift, like in the last handful of years shift. And it's a shift that's been met with a lot of positivity from women excited about seeing themselves better represented in a game, or more excited about a game, or seeing like a buff guard captain be a woman, like, appropriately figured and not over-sexualized. That's something that we've seen a lot of excitement from. But the flip side of this, we've also seen some really, really intense vitriol, and primarily on the internet, again, not necessarily in those friendly local gaming store spaces, but that vitriol is, it lives and it breathes in the experience of the people around it. So if I'm a woman talking about Warhammer for the first time, with somebody, I'm asking like, what's it like, right? And it's like a lot of things, and it's hard to talk about Warhammer without talking about the ways that it's a bros game in a lot of ways. And there's been a shift, but it's a slow and a gradual one. For one thing, 40K still talks about the empire of mankind. And in the late 80s, we shifted to saying humanity most of the time, or even in some cases, humankind when it's necessary to classify that way. And it's very much talked about as that kind of a thing. Inclusivity is a big puzzle. It's a hard one. And I think some people will point to women saying, I'm just not really into that kind of thing, as an example of why that gender divide exists. Mm-hmm. But I think that's an oversimplification of it. The reality is the overwhelming majority of people aren't interested in deep, engrossing, tactical strategy miniature wargaming. It's a niche, but it's a really popular and really successful niche for the people who learn about it and get passionate about it. And I know lots of people who started playing by saying, when I was growing up, I saw like a couple of minis, like some people playing it, and I always kind of wanted to get into it. And I'm so excited that I've got some disposable income and I've got a good group of friends who are getting into it, and I'm going to jump into this and I'm really into it. And they never encounter resistance going from that place to the journey of becoming a competitive tournament-going wargamer. And I know women who are in a place of saying, like, I saw those things, the figures that you paint and stuff, and I think that seems kind of cool, who are at that beginning place. And their journey to get to competitive tournament-going wargamer has a lot more hurdles to jump over.
That was very wonderfully said.
No, thanks.
You're welcome. Do we want another comment or another question?
It's your show. You get to decide. I'm just a guest.
You are my guest, and what you want also matters, but I am going to pull up the comment.
Sounds good. Do it. Go ahead.
I'm in charge. Anyway. Brian Fox. Speaking of fixing inclusion in gaming, Is there a way to be more inclusive in a setting like 40K, just the most extreme example I can think of, without being pandering or just aggressively retconning a la J.K. Rowling?
I'm glad you brought up J.K. Rowling on a show about trans rights.
Right? That's why I was like, we're doing this comment.
I've got a complicated relationship with Joanne these days. She's been on the wrong side of history a couple of times on Twitter lately. So without giving her more space than she deserves, because she's already got $1 billion+ platform, and she's not probably something that needs to be the focus of the conversation. Is there a way that a world could be more inclusive to a variety of people, including especially women? Yeah, absolutely. Right? Like, could 40K not say the empire of mankind? Could it say humanity? Could Sisters of the Battle be like a broadly seen, acknowledged, and respected faction that's given, core codex treatment? Awesome. That's new, and it's great, and it's huge, and it has got so many women talking to me about, like, I'm just so excited to make an army now. And those are just the ones that talk to me, right? Like, that's great. I bought a box. I was all over it. Could, the guard pack include, a set of sprues with female identifiable heads that allow you to put them on those bodies and have them work out? And would that be all that needs to be done? Because someone wearing power armor doesn't need to have a boob plate on the front of it, or, power armor high heels, which is still a thing that brand new sculpted models are produced with every day in these gaming industries. Yeah, I think there's 1,000 things that could be done there. The resculpting of core Space Marines with Primaris Space Marines are an example of a gentle adjustment to when we made this, it was the 80s, and things looked a certain way, and the technology has gotten better, and the understanding has gotten better, and we can make these people look more like the beings they're supposed to be. We could do that with every female sculpt in the Games Workshop range. And it's a chore that should be undergone and could make things feel better. That's just the mechanical, physical product in front of you. The stories that are being told are also getting better, but they could be a lot better still. How would a fantasy world go about doing this? Well, I think we talked a little bit about representation before. I think one of the steps to do is to just actively consult people who've got good perspective on it. Like, I'm not saying we should make sure that we've got trans people of color authors. That sounds great. But not even doing that, like, just, hey, I wrote this black character in a book. Can someone read this just to make sure I'm not being, like, weirdly racist in a way I'm not even conscious of? And then have someone read it and be like, the fact that he comes from the jungle and is kind of talked about as a savage person all the time, is there another way we could do that? Like, that's a thing. That's something that would be really easy to just have a consultant talk about. Just bringing in more people who've got some perspective and have got some lensing and can do some stuff about, making those games bigger, making those communities larger. And then we just need to take the people who say, like, this project is pointless and we should never do this, and it's not worth inviting new people into gaming because I like the people I already have in gaming and I'm going to keep liking them until they turn 80 and die. We just need to tell those people, like, this game isn't for you. And Games Workshop has done a good job earlier this year of releasing a big public statement that's about that. But actions are louder than words, and they still have a setting that is a satire of fascism that is feeling increasingly less and less satirical, and there maybe needs to be a second chapter to that particular statement.
All right. All right, so we're going to do one more question, and then one more comment, and then we're going to hop back to the questions. So, Mark McWarhammer Pants again. AOS has such a much better female represented model range. Do you find more women play that versus 40K or other games with less representation?
Okay, so AOS is short for Age of Sigmar, for folks who might not know, which is a sort of descendant of Warhammer Fantasy Battle or Warhammer Fantasy, which is sort of the OG fantasy Tolkien-esque inspired miniature game. It's not the Lord of the Rings miniature game, but it's in that fantasy world with elves and dwarves, etc. Age of Sigmar is a little bit more high fantasy, a little bit pulpier, and as Mark points out, it does have a better representation of women in the range. From the ground up, they made their flagship army has representation from more than, in fact, 2 genders. There's non-binary gender characters who are talked about in the fiction. Very briefly, again, but representation matters, so it's cool that that's a thing that I can say out loud. Their core range is about that. Do I see more women playing it? Yes. At a local store level, still not a lot of market penetration there. Do I sell more of it to women than I do 40K as a percentage of sales? Yes, absolutely. More women are excited to buy things that include their characters in it. And more women are excited to play a game in a world where there are women and are not hypersexualized, even if they're not playing with them, which is an interesting kind of insight. Because I'll see people say like, oh, well, my brother's wife also plays and she has a whole army of dwarves and they're all men and she doesn't seem to care. And like, maybe, or maybe the way you're asking that question doesn't really give her an opportunity to express her caring. Or maybe she'd be even happier to know that there were options for people like her and that she belonged in that game. Maybe not. Like maybe all those things aren't true. But I think those are steps that could include what representation looks like. And this is a big topic and not necessarily your whole show's topic. So like we don't have to talk endlessly about representation. It's a bit of a passion of mine. I do want to bring more people into gaming. But it's
yeah, it being a passion of yours is exactly why I wanted you to talk about it. You're
fine.
Yeah, you're absolutely welcome to discuss and make words with your mouth. You're doing a good job, and I appreciate it.
Thank you. The mouth words, they're my thing.
The mouth words.
Did a whole background around it. Anyway.
All right, I think it's my turn.
Probably.
Because I made you go like 3 times in a row.
That sounds right.
It does. 11, 12. All right. Do you feel like your transition has been public?
Good question. In some ways, absolutely yes. Right. I made a big Facebook post to the 1,200 friends on Facebook that I have or whatever. We've got like quite a few subscribers on my channel, Arcane Assist, and that was a conversation that was, we took a hiatus. We explained the hiatus was basically about the need for transition. We're now taking a second hiatus because of COVID, but that's not really my fault. And that has been like, that was something that I talked about. I have been on podcasts with Jay Larson. He runs the Meta and asked me on an episode to talk about transition, my experience around that. I was on a charity stream for some friends in the UK who were doing a charity fundraiser for mermaids. And, when they asked, would you be willing to play some games with us on the stream? I said, obviously and absolutely, like this is a cause I can't say no to. So not only is it something that I'm very passionate about, but I've been really, really happy and excited to be able to be like a very visible figure in the gaming community that I've had quite a few people reach out to me asking questions about. And that's because I put that out there. Like I'm not critical of that. I don't have any objection to it. I invite and I appreciate people asking me questions about like, there's someone in my life I care about who's having some gender questions and I want to be a better ally to them. I myself am having some gender questions and I need a confidant to really bounce some of those experiences off. Or simply, I don't know another trans person other than knowing of you. Like in many of these cases, it's not even knowing you, it's knowing of you. Like it's knowing you as a figure in a community and being able to say like, I want to know more. I want to be a better potential ally, but I have questions that I don't know how to ask and I need help with that. And I want to be that for people. Like I'm very happy to be that. So the question, was my transition public? Some elements of transition are necessarily and needfully always private, right? You get asked some pretty personal questions and I don't always answer those questions. Sometimes I gently deflect them and maybe educate why that's not a question that's really appropriate to ask. But I think many elements of my transition have been quite public. I think a lot of people are aware of what's happened for me. I mean, I think not only am I like a known name in the gaming scene, but I was a known name before with a now dead name. Like those things don't go away and I don't want them to. I'm very proud of the fact that my transition gets to be something that allows me to do public good. It's a sort of service-minded perspective.
Yeah, that is an awesome perspective to have. And I'm really glad that you have it.
Me too.
Well, yes, of course you're glad.
It was touch and go for a bit there because suicide rates are pretty high among trans people. For a while, I was the statistically most likely person to kill myself in a room.
Oh, good.
Yeah, that's just a little trans joke there. Slip them in from time to time.
Yeah.
Dark humor. It's like food. Not everyone gets it.
All right. We have some questions about Brawl Machine.
Cool. Yeah, Brawl Machine is a slightly more introductory format, designed in part by the Line of Sight guys who've done a lot of great work around it. It's mostly been beta tested on a digital format for playing War Machine, because a lot of people are playing War Machine digitally, but it's a bit of a cumbersome game to play digitally. So Brawl Machine scales those things down pretty aggressively, and it's kind of a brand new game existing within another game's space. As a result, there's a lot of things in it right now that are kind of vaguely broken, and they're working really, really hard to tune those elements. I think it's a great way to play on War Table if you're a War Machine player and you're keen about getting your doll itch on, which sounds like something that I don't mean it to be. If you're excited about playing some tabletop games, definitely check out Brawl Machine. It's cool, it's fun, and it's worth trying. If you don't know what I'm talking about at all, because you're not a War Machine player or a miniature gamer or anything like that, some people like games that let them use toys, and sometimes it's better to use fewer toys because then you can clean them up more easily.
Hooray! All right. Got the doll itch scratched, and we're going to carry on.
Doll itch. Yeah, I said that out loud. I hope this became a meme.
Yeah, I'm just copying from the comments. So
yeah, thanks for that.
Yeah, it wasn't me. It was Josh.
Lucky number
13, which happens to be the next question that we have. So
at some point we're going to be going in order because we'll just
eventually we will just be rolling for fun.
Fair.
Alrighty. This is one that I feel like we've touched on. So
I've been a little all over the place. Is that your point?
No. Anyway, how can game designers have trans representation without resorting to stereotypes?
Oh, cool. Yeah, no, this is totally good. So I was talking to a friend who was not a game designer, but like just writing an RPG, like a D&D campaign. And I was like, hey, friend who I care about, so I'm going to challenge you on shit because that's what friendship is about. #Aristotle. Why, like, do you include trans and non-binary people in your RPGs? And he was like, not like deliberately, not like consciously, but I do it if like the story takes me to that place. And I was like, okay, cool. You're a receptive person, but have you thought about the fact that that might put you in dangerous territory in terms of just playing on tropes or feeling like the story took you there when you're telling a story similar to or adjacent to some of the other trans stories that you've seen in media, which are almost always trauma narratives? And he was like, I hadn't thought about it that way. And the conversation continued into a place of friendship and delight. But my point is, if you're a game designer and you're trying to include trans representation, do it deliberately and consciously. But don't do it like, don't make the focus of the story their transness. Make the transness a feature of them, like something that is important about them. Don't spend a lot of time talking about how traumatic it is, because it continues to paint us as a wholly traumatized person. And I keep telling people, I've got stuff to complain about, but last year was the best year of my entire life. Being out is so much better than it isn't. Like, the closet is a death sentence, and the alternative is happy wholeness, and it comes with some inconveniences. But my life is one of jubilance and celebration and excitement, and not one of sadness and emptiness and loneliness and trauma. And the more you can help tell the story that I need told, the better the representation is.
Yeah. And
consultants, talk to people, get some feedback. That's good. Again, a bit of a rehash, but yeah.
But yeah, I think the specificities.
Specificity?
That's a
fucking mouthful of a word.
Yeah, my mouth isn't making good with the talk today. You're gonna have to do it for me. Anyway, I thought that was very well worded, and I was so distracted by myself not being able to speak that I forgot what words I was trying to find out. So we're just gonna roll on and pretend the words stopped with you.
I'm gonna roll? Is that what you
we're gonna roll. I'm gonna stop talking.
All good. I rolled a 14, which comes after 13. We're on a track here.
We're on a roll.
I promise we're on. Is that you know better than that? You play D&D. No one wants that joke in their lives. On a roll. Reading comments here.
Just for that, I'm going to ask you a question. What was it like becoming someone who was visibly other?
Okay, that's fair. So I always was other. I just wasn't visibly other. And that's a good distinction to draw. Because hearing that question, I think a lot of people are going to think, what was it like becoming someone who was visibly other? And the important thing to think about when you hear that question is, what was it like to become someone who was other and have that become visible? Like to change the state of your otherness to visible. Mm-hmm. I've always been someone who, because of my lensed minority experience, has had empathy for the suffering that can be caused by that, and has had significant blind spots around just what that lived experience is like because of my position of privilege. I got to pass in circles as a man. I got to be the most privileged kind of human being that exists in the world. And I gave that up and had to, had to learn what that felt like. It's worth it. It's still worth it. It's just better in every way. My life is so fundamentally happier, healthier, and more survivable because I get to be who I am. But yeah, no, visible minority experiences are challenging. And I wouldn't, I wish that it was easier to be visibly other in the world. There are certainly spaces that I'm more thoughtful about. I call ahead to restaurants and I check that they don't, that they can handle seeing a trans person walk in the door. And I definitely find locales and places where I've gone a couple of times and introduced myself and things feel a bit more familiar. And I'm attentive to those behaviors. And I really do try hard to positively review and single out establishments and businesses that are respectful of transness. I don't do the thing where I give like 1-star reviews to places who just like people who just don't quite get it or don't really do that work. But I will say in a 5-star review of a restaurant, I went here, I'm a visibly trans woman. I went with my wife. So there was obvious queer representation. It was clearly a romantic dinner. They were respectful. They were thoughtful. They seated us nicely. They handled things with grace and kindness. And my server was so-and-so. And, she was amazing. Like she was great with us. And it was a lovely experience. And that's not a guarantee for someone like me. So I really appreciate that. And I try to do that kind of advocacy because I feel like people don't necessarily get acknowledged for being respectful of people who are visibly other. And I want to encourage that kind of empathy in the world. But yeah, no, it changed my way of behaving. I used to walk in that door without thinking once or even, considering that I would be anything but treated as the most important customer. And now I know I'm not. And that means that I don't take it for granted anymore.
Yeah. Oh, the calling ahead to a restaurant is something that I never considered being an action.
Yeah, I one of the things you pointed out the change to being visibly other, and I guess I'm sort of talking a little bit about like the experience of being visibly other. But I know about that thing because I do consider it action because it's a change in behavior, and so many things are changes in behavior now, like. I have to think really hard about how I look in the mirror and how that's going to feel for the other people around me before I walk out of a hotel room at a convention. So I get up 20 minutes earlier than the other people in the room and I work hard about it. And sometimes that includes putting on makeup. Sometimes that includes just making sure that I'm presentable in a different kind of way because I know that I am every trans person that person has ever met in a moment sometimes. And for me, I do that interaction with a human being 60 or 70 times a day. But for them, that was the first trans person they ever met. And they need to have that, those resources and those tools. I need to be the best kind of advocate in those moments. So, being part of a visible minority means I need to be ready to defend my right to be all the time. But it also means I need to be ready to make the world better for people like me all the time.
Yeah. And I've heard people in regard to this topic say that we shouldn't have to be on edge or we shouldn't have to advocate. We shouldn't have to educate. And it's just, yes, in an ideal world, this show wouldn't have to exist. In an ideal world, I wouldn't have to explain to someone why my pronouns are a thing. I could just be like, oh, non-binary. And they'd be like, okay. Or I could just they, them, or whatever. I can just do a quick little tap my pronoun button and they figure it out and everything's good. But most of the time, people are going to ask me about it. People are going to just want to find out as much as they can. And it's a combination of like just genuine ignorance of just like I've never heard that before and I need it explained. And then it's sometimes people have their remarks and their things to say. And it's about navigating around that. And I try to pick the genuine moments when you can tell that someone really wants to learn instead of someone when they scoff when they ask.
Yeah, I mentioned that whole like notion of like 60 times a day, and like it's not every day, but some day, like especially with COVID, it's not every day. But there are some days where I'm a front facing staff member in a business that we have maybe 300 or 400 regulars, people who would have known me on a first name basis, and I had to over the course of a year have a coming out conversation with nearly every single one of them.
Yeah.
Partly because people are really, really bad at like discussing transness. So like I felt like it would disseminate in the community, but it just kind of didn't. People were like, "Well, I just didn't want to tell anybody." I was like, "Fuck! Like, please just help me," which is fine. Like that's not anything.
Yeah, and that's something.
Yeah, sorry. No, after you.
I was going to say a lot of people try to think like othering language is that's not a slur. It's like a bad word. Like Rebecca's a transgender. Like they whisper it and they act like you can't say it, even though it's just like oh, Bob is black. That's a fact about Bob. You can and it's not bad to say it. It's if you're saying it in a bad way, like oh, Rebecca. Then yeah, of course you're doing that be a dick thing I warned about earlier.
Yeah, don't do that. Yeah, no, like othering is it's complicated, and I don't know everything about it, and I've spent a long time not having to think about it, and having to think about it now has changed things for me. You look like you wanted to address a comment.
I was thinking about it, but just for the sake of time, I'm going to say we'll get through the questions and then we'll go through the comments after.
Cherry pick a couple that feel good to do. Okay.
Yeah,
sure,
just because it is. We've been an hour 3 minutes already. So.
Okay. Well, apparently we should proceed. All right. What more questions do you have?
All right.
How many more questions are there? Do we want to forgo the die rolling and just do them in order?
All right. Yeah, let's
go. Give them to me. I'll try to keep my answers a little bit more succinct.
I forgot to circle that one. I literally almost. All right. How did your support network change when you came out? This is one I do feel like we've addressed a bit, but.
Yeah. I mean, I built a support network really consciously coming out. That was really important to me, and something that was advised by therapists and by other people who know things about this. And I did research about transition, and they said the first thing you do is to build the support network, a group of people you can come out to, you can have a good conversation with, and they can help you do some of the early labor that's really important. I mentioned my boss, Jay, was really important to me. His wife, Leanne, was also really important to me. Like a lot of cis women who could do some of the labor of like the things that like moms teach their daughters when they're young. Like I need to learn about those things and know about those things to just sort of have a better understanding of it. And I couldn't exactly reach out to my mom. I told her as soon as I felt like I could, like over the phone, but we live very, very far away from each other. Canada's super big and she's on the other side of it. And my sister was a big part of that. She was an amazing ally who, got it from day one and, sort of said like, yeah, that makes sense. And was fantastic. My wife was a big part of it. She's known for almost 10 years and has always been very, very gentle with me about the process and didn't always get it and had to do a lot of labor and learning herself. So people you trust, not just to already get it, but to be willing to put the time and energy into you to learn what it means. Mm-hmm. Sometimes if you're like, oh, my support network, I've talked to like 4 different trans people, like they're good allies and they can give you great perspective, but you also need to build people who are foundational to you and help those people like do that labor with you and learn those things. And sometimes like I can be a good ally and a good advocate, but if you come to me with like, I've got these early gender questions, I already kind of know where the end of that journey is for a lot of people. And I definitely know where the end of that journey is for me. So I might make assumptions or I might not necessarily be a super useful ally for people who are still taking those little baby steps because it's hard. It's like teaching someone to drive. It's a good example. Teaching someone to drive is one of the hardest things to do because when you're first driving, it's the most unimaginably difficult process. You have to concentrate on 7 things at once. And if you fuck up any of them, you could kill someone or destroy a many $1,000 vehicle. But when you're teaching someone to drive, like it's like breathing. It's so reflexive. It's so simple. It's so easy. Why are you having a problem with this? So a really someone who's a very experienced driver who's gone on the journey of driving a lot and has a ton of driving experience might be a good person to teach you how to drive. And they definitely have a lot of expertise in that area. But you also just need someone who's close to you, who understands your style of learning and exploring knowledge, who can make it feel gentle and simple and can help you navigate the risk. Anyway, I like metaphors.
Yeah. And those were good. I thought those were good metaphors. So
Sometimes I'm a little too concrete with stuff, so it's too metaphorical. I apologize. Next question.
All right. Why are some people afraid of the threat to the norm made by trans people?
Interesting. Why are some people afraid of the threat to the norm represented by trans people? I think sometimes it feels like there's an invasion of space happening. And I think most especially most trans women I know are like timid people who've spent much of their life being told that their existence isn't valid and have finally gotten like a peak of sunlight. They're not violent people, and they're not likely to endanger anyone by, carefully going into a washroom, rushing to a stall, doing their business, and then like debating whether or not they can feel safe enough to wash their hands. Like, that's the experience you're dealing with. These are not sexual predators. But I think there's a lot of misinformation around transness because anyone can be uncomfortable with otherness. Mm-hmm. And trans people are just kind of rare. Like, we're maybe 1% of the population. That's a difficult statistic. Some people say 0.6% of the population. At varying times in history, we've been different numbers, and they've all been in that sort of range. And it's hard to know how many trans people there would be if being trans wasn't so traumatic. Because a lot of people are like, you know what, I know that's probably true of me. I can't do it because I'm afraid I would die, lose my family, lose my job, et cetera, et cetera. Mm-hmm. And all the reasons that I said were hard to get me to that place of transition are a lot of the reasons why some people maybe don't. But I think people are afraid of a threat to the norm. I think people are afraid of difference. I think people are afraid of things they don't understand. And with the statistical numbers being so low, I think a lot of people have never met a trans person and have only seen horrific depictions in movies or are afraid of what it means. I think parents are afraid for their children. It means they will have unsatisfying lives. And I'm a case in point of somebody who has found purpose and galvanization and the ability to do good and to volunteer and to, find meaning through my experience. So that's not true, but I think it's really tempting to think that it will be a life of suffering that your kid can avoid by just not being trans, which is impossible. They can't pick that. That's not a choice they get to make. They get to pick to never affirm that experience. So yeah, I think transness is scary because it's different.
Yeah.
That's what I got.
Yeah, and you're right. That's that is what I was hoping for in your answer. Is
maybe other made up reasons, but those are
that's the main one that does
jump out at you.
Yeah.
All right. Yeah. What's next?
Alrighty. In what ways have you observed people treating you differently since coming out?
So I covered this a little bit. I found some surprising allies, like cis women or sometimes other queer people. Because I'm visibly queer in a way that I wasn't before, I think some people have been like, oh, sweet, another queer person, right? Like Elizabeth, who's a War Machine player, found me at Warfare Weekend and gave me a women in War Machine badge that was like a small number. These were printed that were like the sort of thing that you stitch to a bag. And she's like, I had one of these, I had an extra one. And when I found out about you coming out, I wanted to track you down at the show and give it to you. And I just about lost it in tears. I was barely holding it together. And I think I was in the middle of a game of Twilight Imperium. It was my turn and she gave it to me and I was just holding on just barely. Oh. But surprising allies, people who just see you differently and they just they understand because they have some lens of empathy or some experience of otherness or queerness or a way that they know that they see just a little bit deeper into who you are because of that. And that's some of my favorite experiences. I also, I've had less positive ones. Transphobia is often subtle. People find a reason why you're not invited to a thing, or they just sort of forgot to include you in something. Or I've had people think that I was less good at War Machine because I'm a woman now, which is really funny. I went to a convention and just steamrolled 5 people in a row because they're like, oh yeah, okay. And I heard you spend a lot of time focusing on that transition. And I was like, no, those skills don't go away, but whatever. So, experience is different. And then I've had people who are just like, I know I still like it, and I know you're still the same person. I don't get this, and I don't understand it, and I kind of want to understand, but also it feels like it's going to be a lot of work, so I don't necessarily want to understand. Like, you get that kind of half measure, and I try really hard to get those people on board, but it doesn't always happen. You lose friends over it, and for some reason, just like certain types of people's existence has become a political issue for some people, and I have had very passionately religious people on both sides of this debate come to me. I've had people say like, listen, I'm a very, very devout religious person, and the Bible said men shouldn't wear women's clothing, but I believe you when you say you are genuinely a woman, and I know that like has a plan for everyone, and I accept your transition as a necessary part of that experience, and I want to understand it better because I want to see that divinity in everyone, and I think that's beautiful. And I've had people say like, well, obviously I'm not okay with this part of you because I'm religious, and I having been met with both of those expressions, I try to treat both with grace, and it's not always easy.
Yeah.
Next question.
Next question. Alrighty. How do you think you would have understood your transness without proper terminology?
Ooh, I can actually speak to this because I didn't have proper terminology for a lot of years. Growing up, I didn't know what it meant. I thought I was just like a girl, and but no one got that. Or like, I would sometimes think that like when I'm asleep, I'm a girl because it's just me then, and my dreams, and all of the dreams know that I'm a girl. But then when I wake up, I'm like magically not anymore, and I don't know how to fix that. And I tried a lot of things. Like I tried like writing like messages and putting them under my pillow at night. And for a chunk of time when I went through a religious phase, I tried praying for a miracle, to be changed into like like this God folk seemed like got it really going on. Like, let's make that thing happen. Didn't fix the problem, but later doctors got to. So maybe he did, maybe in mysterious ways and whatnot.
Yeah. Just takes time.
Yeah, like get your act together a little bit, right? The burning bush didn't take this long. Exodus did though, so like 6 of 1 miracles are hard. Yeah, I think I didn't know the right words, and I didn't know that I was allowed to be. I thought I was just wrong. And it wasn't until I learned that there was a way to be right, that there were words for it, that I really had the ability to talk about who I was. And I always saw myself as the women in films and television, and as those characters. And I had a friend who's a member of like a repeated role play group, so I came out to, who was actually like, oh yeah, like you always play female characters in D&D, like that makes sense. And I was like, oh, didn't know anybody noticed. Like, obviously they did. I felt like I played role-playing games from a really early age, and that probably helped me. And I think knowing that I was allowed to do that, and I'd have to kind of pretend it was a joke, or I'd brush it off, or I'd talk about how like it was necessary for the kind of character story that I was telling, and it just happened to always be that I was telling that kind of character story, and it turns out the character was me. Metaphors. Yeah, no, I think I didn't have the words, but I did have a kind of fantasy outlet. And I did have gaming, and I did have a place where I could be and feel represented in a different way. And I think that helped me a lot. And I don't know if I'd be here if I didn't have it. So gaming's pretty cool. You all should try it.
Yeah. I'm glad you have it.
Yeah, me too. This is cool too. Like, the rest of the world is all right now, but for a while it was just all about the gaming.
Yeah.
And my mom used to talk about how I would disappear into these fantasy realms, and how she would lose me for big chunks of time into this I'd get obsessed with D&D, or obsessed with Magic the Gathering, or obsessed with these things, and just like be so in those worlds. And I thought for a while I was just an obsessive person, and that was just who I was. And obviously, there are elements of me that are quite perfectionist and that have built habits around those behaviors. But it took me a long time to realize that I was disappearing into those worlds because they were places that I felt like I was who I was. And now that I am the person I am every day, and that I get to live that way, it's much harder to lie. It's much harder to be dishonest. And it's much harder to disappear into places because I just want to be now. in a way I didn't before.
I'm really glad you want to be.
Me too. It's it's all right.
Yeah.
Next question.
Next question. All right. How did coming out impact your relationship to the board game community?
I mean, I've addressed some of this already, but like, by being a public transition, I got a lot of people asking questions, and I think I got to do some good labor around helping people understand the experience better. I got kicked off my WTC team. The World Team Championships of War Machine team kicked me off after I came out to my team. So I was disappointed in that experience. But I do feel like I got to do some amazing labor connecting people and talking to folks and being able to like find new allies and build passionate friendships and to unite communities around being able to say like, this is something we accept and we want to come to understand. And that was really beautiful. I was grateful because my response that I got from people, especially publicly, was hugely positive. And there was a weird period of time where my like core gaming store friends were amazing allies. And they came from a variety of political backgrounds, but they were all like I had a friend who's like quite a bit more right-wing than me, which is to say he was a person. But he said like, I've never known a trans person before, and I never really got it before, and I don't know that I get it now, but I know you, and I obviously like and care about you, so there has to be something here. Mm-hmm. And that is honestly like the biggest like political takeaway is it's really, really, really hard to hate some invisible other when you know someone. And transness has become something that has gotten to like continue to be maligned because there are so few of us. But the more visibility we get, and especially the more authenticity that visibility gets, the harder it's going to be to continue to deny our personhood. Mm-hmm. But yeah, no, I think my relationship was like hugely good in this small, very, very safe store community, like, of a few thousand people, but like small in many ways. And then like in the wider like War Machine community and the sort of like community of convention goers and friendships and connections that I built through that whole thing and through our YouTube channel, it was also quite positive. Like either, the people who were upset or disagreed with it were silent or unsubscribed or just weren't interested anymore, or I became a figure who wasn't worth following. But like that was actually fairly non-hostile, right? And it was pretty positive. And then the support I got was beautiful and amazing. And there was this like slightly wider community of people who had been like kind of specifically toxic in a weird way, or who were like kind of not speaking to me anymore. That were this group of people who I'd kind of fallen in with or become friends with, who were like the really great competitive Canadian War Machine players in that little circle. And enough of them were just like not there for it anymore, just like didn't want any part of my life, or just sort of was willing to write me off because of my transition experience. And then I think more of them, but enough of them, were just silent. They just didn't say anything. They didn't say anything supportive. They didn't condemn the actions of those other few. And that is just about as hostile. Like it's insufficient to be silent on this issue if you know someone who's being ostracized for those behaviors. So yeah, I think my experience of the board game community coming out was like a beautiful flower of support and kindness, series of angry thorns, and then like a large, beautiful rose bush that's worth admiring from a distance. And there's space for me to live and grow there. And that's all I can hope for.
That's amazing. And that's so encouraging to anyone who wants to get into the community or people who want to come out.
Yeah. And I think, eventually, as people come out and as people feel accepted and supported in this community and see other people who are able to do so safely, it will become clear to the people who are not willing to be kind that they don't belong in this place.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a huge thing when you're in a community is you can't really be a dick.
Well, sometimes some people. Yeah, we won't dig too deep into it. My goal here is not to call people out. I'm trying to be kind and try to be thoughtful, but I think it's ignorant to say that there's no sense of loss associated with the experience. Mm-hmm. And there is, and I have tried very, very hard to not acknowledge it, to not make a big deal about it, and definitely not to single anyone specifically out. And that's definitely not what I'm trying to do here. I'm trying to be graceful about the whole experience, but it did it did feel really hard and did fill me with some sadness for a period of time. And I want to be honest about that because I think that's the goal of your show, and all of your previous episodes have been very rich in honesty.
And I appreciate it. I appreciate your honesty and the honesty of guests past.
Are we done with questions? Are we finished?
We have two more.
Oh, goodness. Okay, let's
or
go.
one more. That was, sorry.
Well,
I just forgot to start.
That was the penultimate question. This is the last question.
All right. How do you think your board game career would have been impacted had you transitioned sooner?
That's an interesting question, and I don't necessarily know the answer to it. Walk a mile in someone else's shoes sort of deal. That's not really the comparison I make. I'm just going to ramble for a bit here while I think of an answer. I don't know what that path would have looked like, but I imagine in some ways it would have been harder. Mm-hmm. I think I really connected with a lot of important people who connected with me because they felt immediate commonality without necessarily knowing things about me. And then knowing that we had a strong connection and a bond and something worth respecting, they were able to see me as more than just a trans person, but also someone worthy of acknowledgement. And that let me do some great labors in terms of trans community. Would I have started those things earlier? Maybe. Would I have had the same platform that I do? Probably not. Would it have been as hard to lose the things that I lost if I didn't have them in the first place? No. But in a way, I never really had those things if they were able to be lost for this reason. So I don't know. I mean, it's hard sometimes as a trans person to think about what would have or could have been if you had transitioned earlier, because it does feel like lost time in a lot of ways. So I console myself with the sense of loss associated with those things by thinking about all of the work that I'm able to do by having built the community of people that I had when I was in a place of incredible privilege. And now, with the lens of experience that I have, be able to talk about that, be able to share it with people, and be able to do some of the work to make it easier for the next person, whomever they may be. We mostly covered that question before, so I can be succinct this time.
Yeah, of course.
The trick of being succinct is to have already written multiple essays about the topic.
Yeah.
Very Federalist paper approach to life.
All right. That was very beautiful. I thought that was like a good close for our final question of the evening. I wish I had a final closing thought on that response, but I don't. So we're going to continue talking about our comments because we got a few that I thought basically that look long, so they're probably interesting.
Fair,
and because I can't read them from over here. So here we are. So we're going to bring up another Mark make more Warhammer pants. I don't know why I can't say that word.
Mark is probably good.
Mark says, would you find it more meaningful to find out that a character in a game was trans all along, but it was not intentionally stated unless it was germane to the story, or would you rather have them make it be stated? Sorry for the amount of questions. We operate in adjacent but different gaming circles, and I don't want to talk to you, and I don't get to talk to you too often, and I don't want to bombard you with trans questions when I do see you.
Okay, a few things. First of all, absolutely fine to bombard me with trans questions. You're a respectful human being who's engaged in real, legitimate curiosities about it, and I think those are great curiosities. And I'd love to have this kind of conversation. And in a world where we could do it in a gaming store, I would love to do that, Max. So I'll take you up on it when vaccines are a thing. Mm-hmm. In answer to that question, I think representation doesn't do enough if it isn't seen to be representation. So I do probably need the trans characters to be seen to be trans characters, but that doesn't need to be huge. Like Anne Leckie, who's one of my favorite science fiction authors, wrote a book called The Raven Tower, which is kind of like a fantasy world retelling of Hamlet in a couple of ways. And the Horatio character in it is a trans character. He's a trans man. And that's addressed like a couple of times in a sort of low key way. And they're in like a low tech world where like there's no hormone replacement therapy. He just rides a horse like all the other dudes and does some other things and just like is included in that world. And he's sort of like best friends with the Hamlet character. And he shows back up with the prince and things are kind of confusing and a bit disconcerting. And Someone brings up something and it's kind of indirectly stated that like, you know what it is? There's magic in the world. And his prince friend, Hamlet, is like, I could use this magic wish granting power I have when I'm the king to solve your problems. And he's just like, I don't have problems. I'm happy with how I am. And like, the way that I am is not an issue. And everyone who, understands and cares about me, knows that I'm a dude, and, other people, aren't really worth my regard, right? Like they have like a quick, very brief conversation about it that really engages with the like, trans people aren't looking for magical fixes. They're looking for just like respect and acknowledgement. And it's thoughtful and it's quick, and it obviously required the author, who's a presumably cis woman, to like, do some consulting or have some lived experience that gave her enough adjacency to do good research around it. But it's really respectful and it's really brief, and it's even more thoughtful than I'm making it sound. And then he just continues to be like the main character in this book. And, that's the story. That's the tale, And I don't think as a cis reader, that part of it would be particularly important to me. But as a trans reader, it defined the book as core and beautiful, because it got to tell a story that had previously only belonged to cis people. And it got to tell it in a way that made me feel like it was bigger than any of the component parts, that anyone was invited to be a part of this tale. And that's kind of what theme is supposed to be. So yeah, in answer to your question, I think transness does need to be acknowledged. And it needs to be acknowledged even if it's not germane to that particular story. And I think one of the ways you can do that creatively with writing is by making it be important in a moment. But I don't think like you want to engage with like gender dysphoria. I think you maybe just want to like make it be a brief acknowledged conversation that happens between characters, or have it be something that's treated respectfully, or just like, fucking science fiction and fantasy have got a lot of space to be able to handle these things with creativity and grace that other fiction does not. I think authors can do it, and they've been creative in other places. They blew up the world multiple times and fixed that. I think they can get trans rights right.
Right? Yeah. All right. Our final question. Will Thompson. You have been really open about your experience with the War Machine community. Someone I'm close with has come out to me in confidence and is very early in the process of gender exploration. This person has asked me to keep it to myself, so I'll keep it vague. Is there a way I can help to provide affirmation for their experience without breaking that trust? I am practicing referring to them by their preferred name in private, but I'd like to do it more if I can. Thanks.
Good question. And like, how can you be a better ally, and how can you be more helpful to trans people in your life is like an absolutely, beautiful and germane. I think saying things like, what can I do to help you affirm your experience, is awesome. Like that's a good question because it's open and it lets them think about it. But also sometimes people don't like feel like they have a right to ask some things. So offering specific things like, would you be comfortable with me referring to you by a preferred pronoun, is like a good question to ask in that state. A lot of gender exploration is sometimes exploration. Sometimes to ask somebody like, is there another pronoun you'd like to try in private, is a good way to phrase those questions. Like, would you be more comfortable using a they, them, or would you like to use this, like a she, her, or a he, him pronoun? Like you can offer those things to people as a way to say like, I'm a safe person to try that out with. And then like, they're going to know pretty quickly if it gives them that experience of gender euphoria, and they're going to start to be like, okay, this is a cat I can't put back in a bag. Like it's just not going to happen. Also, why did you have a cat in a bag? So that's great. And like the way that you've gone about being able to that advocacy is really beautiful. And I think it's an amazing opportunity. There are other things you can do. You could specifically schedule times to spend together in a world where you can spend time together, to do some like gender affirmative online shopping together, which can be pretty low risk. You can do some gender affirming dress up or some like costuming work. People often talk about transness as a performance, which it's not. It's bigger than that. And I think that's where some misunderstandings about like Hollywood casting come in. But there is a period of time where the expression of gender performance can give you a way to feel affirmed in your being. And like, I don't put on makeup every day because I feel pretty good right now about a lot of things about the way I present. And like, certainly women can wear pants. Like those are rights we fought for. Like, people had to have a license to wear pants for a chunk of time. I'm not saying that you can't wear pants and be a woman, and you certainly are allowed to wear pants as a trans woman. But sometimes trying on a dress, which is something that is very specifically gendered, can give you a moment of feeling in that space to sort of to play a little bit, to explore, and to figure out what that means for you in a way that you're not always given the space to think about. helping them engage with trans narratives, fiction, things that are appropriate to them. Ivan Coyote is an amazing Canadian author who's written on the experience of transness and has a number of memoir books that are available at your library or you can buy at a bookstore, who is an awesome author who's written like very, very beautiful like prose-esque poetry memoir stuff about like what that notion is like. My wife bought me a gender workbook when I was early in a question thinking about it, which is just a kind of series of playful questions and sort of things that are about exploring that. It's a way that you can, without sort of really pushing somebody, give them resources and remind them that you're a person who is yourself a resource. I like, if this is someone in the War Machine community, I would be more than happy to talk to them about my lens of it and their experience. If you wanted to ask them, like, here's somebody who has said that she would be happy to talk to you about it, like, I'm available for those things and I certainly wouldn't mind. But beyond that, you don't need to demand that their support network expand, but you should remind them that building a larger support network gradually is an important first step. It's an important labor. And help them do it if you can, but don't force anything. Respect their space, respect their confidence. But I mentioned this before, that notion that there came a point in time where people around me were putting way too much effort into keeping my secret and not enough effort into helping me transition. And you don't want to force that on anyone. But there is going to be a point in time, if their trajectory follows the standard, the average one, which it may or may not, your mileage may vary, there's going to be a point in time where your best job is to stop keeping a secret for them and help being their banner bearer, to start being their herald and their advocate. And you need to know when that is, and you need to know that by asking them. And you should repeatedly prompt for those kind of things. You should say, like, I know you've said you want to keep this confident. I know you said you want to keep this just between us. When that changes, I want to know, and I want to help you come out to people. I want to do some of that labor on your behalf, especially people who are afraid are going to have a bad reaction. I want to wear that bad reaction, let them get it out of their system, and then help them come to you with space for a better reaction. And like, that's an amazing labor you can do for people. And this is sufficiently vague that I don't know what to advise specifically, but there is going to come a point in time where you need to switch from confidant to herald, and you got to nail that moment, because that's going to be a big deal.
Mm-hmm.
That's what I got. Are we happy with comments? Is that a good episode, or are you?
Yeah, I think that was a great close. That was a great comment. That was a great question. That was a great answer. I feel great.
Yay, everything's great.
Yeah. So,
we've gone like a few minutes over time, I guess.
Yeah, it's all fine because I'm in charge. There are no rules. I'm in charge. Anyway, thank you everyone so much for tuning in with us tonight. This has been Serious and Sober with Rebecca Banky. I am Ray Lockdust, and thank you again. Oh no, my streamers. Okay, it's time to go. The world is ending. Is it?